Operation Canteen Crasher, or CC for short, is the second Community MvM operation launched by Potato MvM servers, following after Operation Titanium Tank. The campaign had entered public beta on August 22nd of 2018, before officially launching later that year on November 20th. It continued on to the next year until it was later paused on April 1st of 2019 to allow for Potato's first April Fool's operation, Memes vs. Machines, to run for 2 weeks before resuming the campaign and then finally ending on September 23rd of 2019. These days, Canteen Crasher is often considered to be the most boring and wild operation to play through. It is also known for other various things, but regardless of what you think, it would be pretty unfair not to recognize this operation for its historical significance, and by that I mean shaping the direction of Community MvM for years to come. Just as Titanium Tank had a formal document detailing the entire tour in of itself, Canteen Crasher quite similarly had its own document, except it's like 29 pages long. Oh my good. Well, supposedly there was an abridged version of the whole document, but for whatever reason, many of the existing documents around this time had all been mysteriously deleted by the author. Thankfully, someone managed to archive a few papers, but for the most part, all that's left are the important ones, including the PDF for Canteen Crasher that is appropriately called Full Monster. It's up on the Operations TF2 wiki page, but I'll also link it down in the description if you're interested in reading. For this video, I'll be using parts of the PDF to highlight key takeaways for us normies regarding the operation itself. To be more specific about how Canteen Crasher was developed, the campaign hosted a contest starting April 9th of 2018, where they would start accepting missions for the new and upcoming operation. This is quite similar to Titanium Tank, but where Titanium Tank differs in treating the contest as a competition, Canteen Crasher's contest was treated as more of a jam, or as the document calls it, hybrid MvM contest. Instead of picking out the top 6 missions to be featured in the tour, they instead allowed an infinite number of submissions, with a cap of 1 advanced and 1 intermediate per map for every participant. This contest on top of mission making allowed for map making, but uniquely would introduce the item making category for the very first time. Here, item makers were able to submit cosmetics that would have allowed players to wear them through the custom item plugin, but they could also design new cosmetics for the bots themselves. This part of Canteen Crasher is a detail that's rarely ever talked about, and that's because it pretty much was. And this is coming from someone who did actually play Canteen Crasher during its first few months, and I could honestly tell you that I never ran across anybody who was using the equipable cosmetics, but some people did, at least according to the others that were able to provide screenshots. So I guess in some sense, you could say this was the first operation to feature custom equipable items. While we're on the topic of submissions, all 3 submission categories needed to be original work, which means starting from scratch. However, the contest did allow missions that were previously submitted to Titanium Tank to be accepted for Canteen Crasher, so long as they weren't disqualified before. According to them, this was all done to make amends for the prior contest where the organizers felt that they were treating the participants unfairly with their harsh limitations and scoring system. But they also shared the sentiment that they wanted Canteen Crasher to be a superior version of and successor to Titanium Tank. Because of the restructuring of the contest, the judging process would also see a massive rework. Instead of just one person that overlooked every entry and giving an arbitrary score, it is now a team of judges, 5 around the time of the contest. The scoring system would also be reworked into a pass-fail system, meaning that the competition aspect is removed entirely. Each entry now needed to earn at least 3 pass votes to be accepted into the campaign. If the judges vote fail, the mission will instead be rejected. However, this contest allowed rejected missions to be resubmitted an infinite number of times, with a 48-hour cooldown. This is done to allow participants to receive feedback on their missions and to reiterate their work towards being accepted. As for this pass-fail system, we'll be getting to how the flaws of this system were overlooked later down the line. But as far as every player is concerned, Canteen Crasher will be the first operation to adopt the multi-tier medal system. Every medal is themed after the power-up canteen, and there were 6 to collect in total. Before, Titanium Tank featured only 1 medal, and you were required to complete the entire tour to earn it. Canteen Crasher with its medals were instead earned through its premier medal point system. Players like before could just complete missions to earn medals one by one, but if they wanted to speed up the progress towards the higher tiers, they had the opportunity to partake in the newly featured contract system. Potato's contract system featured MvM-specific contracts designed to encourage players to try different weapons and change up their playstyle from the norm. While there weren't map-specific contracts to complete, there were uniquely featured team contracts that players needed to complete altogether. There were a few that can be done without too much thought, but others requires you to coordinate with a full party to complete. The only medal that could not be earned as a normal player was a Platinum Crit Canteen medal, and that was because it was only available to participants who had their work accepted into the campaign. The difference compared to today was that that submissions were also subject to the metal point system, where different kinds of submissions contributed varying amounts, with having one accepted map guaranteeing you the platinum crit medal. One other thing to note is that the values on the screen have been doubled from their original iteration. The rebalancing was made 15 days after the launch of the contest, with a blog post issuing an apology about underestimating the number of submissions required to obtain it, and then later down the line becoming completely obsolete, as it would only take a few months for Potato to compensate participants by just giving out the platinum crit canteen for having at least one map, mission, or item accepted. Yeah, unfortunately Canteen Crasher has had a few bumps in the road during its development, but it does get worse. The submission contest went on from April up until August 15. The contest would close on that date, and the campaign would replace Titanium Tank, which was still going on. That day would have been MvM's 6th anniversary. However, by August 5th, Potato would announce deadline extensions for the campaign launch. The contest would still close on August 15, but any submitted entries would have the grace period up until September 1st. I am honestly unsure what has happened, but if I had to speculate, it's because they had repeated issues with their servers before this point. One of their blog posts even shared pictures of trees falling down on the server host power lines, and it even became a meme sometime around that point.
It's perfect. No, wait. Okay, here we go. What? No!
Security warning!
But of course, it could also be due to the judges being swamped with a massive influx of submissions around this point. Now, despite insisting that Canteen Crasher would launch on August 15, they in fact didn't. Instead, the campaign would launch 7 days later on the 22nd as an open beta. Over the course of the next few months, they would incrementally patch in more submissions and rebalances to the contracts. Nothing worth going into specifically, since all but one patch note survived the purge, that of which we'll be getting to later. But on September 4th, a blog post would later be posted stating that the grace period for submissions would be extended to October 31st. But on top of that, Potato would also announce a Halloween themed contest and start accepting submissions for it to be added into Canteen Crasher.
What?
Closing submissions off and then opening another contest for more submissions to come in, as if the judges weren't being time crunched already. This may have been the most controversial time period of Canteen Crasher, as within the next 14 days, Potato would issue another blog post, a public apology letter for the mismanagement and their incompetence of organizing the campaign and getting through the judging queue. They would go on to compensate contest participants by making the Platinum Crit Canteen medal available for any creator who has something accepted in the campaign. But most importantly, the deadline for the grace period and the Halloween contest would instead end on any particular day after October 31st, and then proceeding to end the blog post with the community scoring a bingo on their cards. Fast forward to November 20th of 2018, and Canteen Crasher would finally exit out of the beta. Valve would spread the news on their TF2 blog, inviting players to partake in the second ever Community MvM operation. By this point, the operation had 28 maps and 50 missions, as well as 100 contracts to complete and up to 5 earnable medals for the player base. However, the grace period in the Halloween contest was far from over, as any existing submissions had until December 9th before the contest would effectively be terminated. This patch would be set for December 12th, but was later pushed to December 21st, titled The Nightmare Before Smissmas Mega Patch. As far as details are concerned, at least 3 more maps were added to Canteen Crasher, and more missions would be added, bringing the mission count up to 68, and the rest is history.
But I'm not done yet!
Now, you might be wondering how the missions were evaluated. Well, after Titanium Tank, they wanted to address the issue where the featured missions were primarily made for advanced level players, and so in order to accommodate for those that are new in experience, Canteen Crasher will be the first to feature intermediate missions to help bridge that gap. While it is quite difficult to know what the judging and testing environment was like back then, I can say that the guidelines are comparable to today, but with a few caveats. The beta testers obviously comprised of those with varying degrees of skill, and Potato foresaw that there could be be some issues with balancing each mission's difficulties. As such, it was highlighted that intermediate skilled players can test intermediates but should stay away from advanced missions unless expert skilled players were present. And the advanced and expert skilled players should play poorly with intermediates, and with advanced they should play decently but use questionable and subpar upgrades. The mission judging guidelines were also similar to today, basically stating that missions shouldn't ever feel boring or grindy to play, that they shouldn't enforce specific metas, loadouts, or specific classes such as medic, and shouldn't encourage cheesing or refunds.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
However, as far as judging feedback is concerned, it's kind of just all over the place. Some submissions had formal feedback in their respective threads, while on others, the judges would just state outright that they would be accepted into the campaign. But of course, you could also just be left on read, like what? Though, with the constant updates in these threads, it's fair to assume they've had other means of giving feedback. However, there was one ginormous oversight with this system. Remember how I mentioned that you needed only 3 pass votes to get into the campaign? Well, that was referring to the fact that you just needed 3 pass votes in one session to be accepted into the campaign. This is unlike today where you needed a total of 3 passes from 3 separate judging teams to be accepted. Potato around this time only had 5 judges to curate the missions, so in some aspects you could forgive them for having a much expedited process. But once a submission is in, then it's in. The only thing that would bar them from being so is by technical difficulties, but regardless of reception, it is deemed playable. Now, it's time to elaborate on why people think of the missions here as what they are. Today, Canteen Crasher is considered boring, because if you play these missions on Potato's archive servers, you will notice that a large majority of the missions are plagued with an overarching issue. The pacing is slow. While it was not elaborated on in the full monster, there are some old messages suggesting that the judging enforced a time quota, where intermediate missions needed to run between 20 to 30 minutes and advanced missions somewhere between 25 to 35 minutes. With this time quota in mind, you will frequently run across many missions where they intentionally pad out the runtime by slowing down the spawn rates, but unfortunately these padded subways lack additional qualities to hide the obvious fact, and as a result the missions tend to become dull and boring to sit through as they drag on. This is pretty evident as when you play through the intermediates in Canteen Crasher, you can, and I'm not joking here, fall asleep, as they were all intentionally designed to be very easy and slow because of the pacing issues mentioned earlier. Although for advanced missions, this is sometimes not the case. And this is where the wild part of Canteen Crasher comes in. As it is the second operation in Potato's catalog, there really wasn't a whole lot to work with or reference off of. There was of course the old Valve tours, the most popular being 2 Cities, Mecha Engine, and Gear Grinder, even though that's an expert tour, but they also only had the top 6 Titanium tank missions and other missions that were accepted during the middle of the contest that also would have been considered the gold standard. Since the contest was treated as a first come first serve, pretty much anything would be accepted if the judges deemed them good enough. So as you can imagine, the mission makers around this time had wildly varying design principles, and by the end of it all, many of the advanced missions here fell into a very wide spectrum of quality. And by quality, I mean the types of bots created and used for these missions. Some missions can be quite vanilla, with a touch of a few custom bots to spice things up. Some might have more custom bots to shoot at, but for the most part maintains that all too familiar MvM experience. And then you just have this.
What? It's just an ordinary... Oh my goodness!
Look, if it isn't obvious, Potato did not have V-scripts or RAF mod to work with back then. So for the most part, everybody used custom bots, for the better or for worse. But as much fun as we can poke fun at Canteen Crasher's catalog of missions, it would be very difficult to imagine a world where this operation never happened. And many players, such as I, never really cared about the issues because at the end of the day, it was brand new MvM content that was free for everyone to enjoy.
This has changed with Potato Server's MvM community contest by the recent announcement of Operation Canteen Crusher. And with the official rule set being listed on the Steam group, Canteen Crusher is
a good way of getting the word out for Canteen Crashers.
It's Canteen Crasher. Oh my god. Although I've only completed enough missions and contracts just to earn the 5 medals and went home after that, this operation had done enough to convince me that Community MvM was worth revisiting every year and checking out all the new things from Potato's ever-growing community of various content creators. And I do owe them some gratitude for giving me a reason to stick with this old game for a while longer, which is why I'll be tearing its missions down to shreds for the next 2 hours this is gonna take. Alright, so maybe all of that could have been its own video, but I felt the need to include it all in the beginning just so we can fully understand the era of which Canteen Crasher came from before diving into its missions. There are 21 intermediate missions and 47 advanced missions to get through, adding up to a total of 68 missions. The campaign did originally come out with 69 missions, however the 69th mission was axed out sometime afterwards, and according to the only surviving patch note ever archived, was due to a game-breaking exploit with the tank in the gate of the map where players would have easily been able to farm all of the team contracts of Canteen Crasher. That mission will be known as outdated processing of the map Hillside, which would later return in the next operation. For the rest of the video, I'll be going through each and every one of Canteen Crasher's missions. I won't be focusing on the technicalities behind said missions or the majority of the maps that debuted here, but I will instead describe my experiences playing through them and giving my rating based on my enjoyment. Rather than just doing missions in one category back to back as my usual routine, I am going to go through the maps in alphabetical order and start looking at their respective missions from intermediate to advanced. Rinse and repeat. Prepare yourselves because, spoilers, it will be quite a bottom heavy tier list that we'll be going through for the next 2 hours. Okay, before we start, I want to briefly mention that Valve has recently made an announcement asking the entire TF2 community to submit MvM maps and missions for Valve to add it to a future update. And I can tell you that the many members of Potato are working to get their older works, including those from Canteen Crasher, polished up with many fixes and balance changes. Just know that the content covered in this video may or may not be an accurate reflection of the iterations that could possibly be playable when the MvM update arrives. Good? Alright, let's go. Let's start off with the Gatebot map, Area 52. There are no intermediates here, but we've got 4 advanced missions back to back to get through. The first mission we'll cover is Interstellar Intervention, and the first thing you'll notice about the mission is that its first wave bar is pretty bloated with a bunch of common bots. Most of them kind of just perform the exact same way, such that maybe they could have been just one icon. The wave then introduces giants to get paired up with some mini giants that the creator classifies as jumbo bots. The worst of the two here were the Tomislav heavies, all with their extremely oppressive range and damage. The wave will then proceed to stall for a pretty good while before sending out the one and only giant mangler soldier of the entire mission. Yeah, not the greatest start, and many of what we're seeing here will carry over to the rest of the mission. These custom bots, for the most part, are designed to be slightly more frustrating than what you're used to fighting. Wave 2 didn't have much, but for some very bizarre reason, when you kill off the last remaining giant soldier with the jumbo bots, the whip soldier support that spawns periodically will suddenly have a buff banner squatted with them. Wave 3 is where it'll start to utilize one of the map's gimmicks. The reason why you're seeing the final tank skin on this first tank of the mission is because it's used to specify whether it's able to capture the gate or not. If this gate happens to be captured, the map will open up this ginormous sightline with hardly any side cover, and this third wave will make sure you regret it by spawning a constant onslaught of hit scan robots, the majority of which are of high skill level. The fourth wave is mainly gatebot swarms, with the second half mostly having custom pyros. Some are jumbos but also move faster with their fire axe. There's also the Man Melter pyros that are also jumbo with the same move speed bonus. By combining health and speed buffs for these mini giants, it just makes this whole subwave an annoying and tedious endeavor. Then wave 5 has a pretty boring start of demo knights and giant pistol scouts. It brings out gate tanks after another, and then later having the 4 giants have varying types of vaccinator medics between their spawns. These kinds of medics will be used a lot throughout the campaign, but another trope that you should take note of are these heater heavies. While they may share the same icon as their standard template, these guys are actually custom made and are specifically tacked on with the ability to burn players on hit. This attribute in particular will be seen all throughout Canteen Crasher, so much so that you can probably make a drinking game out of it. Seriously, you will be seeing this a lot. The 6th and final wave has 4 regular tanks, with 2 spawning at a time. There's 4 giant demos in the beginning, but after that, it'll proceed to stagnate with an assortment of commons. At the finale, you'll face a chief of the mission, named Chief General Star Sector A9. They are basically a stronger charge soldier with 2.5 times the blast radius and 3 times the damage. This boss is pretty horrible to fight on the ground for, so you really want a shield medic or uber canteens for it. Or you can just take the high ground and dodge. Either way, this mission has plenty of odd and questionable design decisions when it comes to their wave structure. It also extends to a few custom bots that really didn't make the experience more exciting to play. Something else worth mentioning is that, yep, we are within the time quota, and this one is definitely one of the longest missions to complete. Interstellar Intervention gets a D. Next we have Tech Mechs. This mission compared to the other one we just covered doesn't use a lot of custom robots. Good news, right? Well, we're still going to be seeing some that are designed for the worst. Like these Cow Mangler soldiers that now have the ability to burn players on hit. Just like, why? You know, I honestly don't know why we have to put burn on hit on robots like these. Of course you can make the case for some robots by making them more special, especially nowadays, but here, it's slapped on. It also doesn't help that their icons don't indicate of this on hit effect either, and for how sinful the heater heavies that can burn on hit are, they are at the very least justified by their proper icons. Anyways, while this mission is far more tame, what it trades for instead is being one of the more frustrating missions to deal with. The main reason for that is that every wave constantly uses teleport engineers every wave. They spawn about a minute into the wave with a very short cooldown of 15 seconds every death, and clearly this mission is based around them because their teleporter's construction speed is significantly boosted from before. It's like the mission is purposefully gatekeeping you from ever wanting to push up, not to mention how painfully annoying it is to constantly babysit at their locations. Sure, they may not seem that bad if you hold near the front, but outside of that, they're way too punishing, and the team really needs to have someone who can run ahead and destroy the teleporter like a spy. Besides the obnoxious use of the engineers, the mission has some decent pacing for most of the waves, but they all have a consistent issue where the ending subwaves drag on far longer than they should. The fourth wave especially, where its last four giant soldiers were all gate bots, when they really shouldn't be when the team has been able to hold down the gate up to this point. The fifth wave is extremely bloated with a bunch of giants to destroy. Many of them like to stack up together, with a few pocketed by giant medics, but this wave overall is pretty relentless, with a constant flux of comments and projectiles all around. The final wave though can only be described as projectile spam. The first part of it has a bunch of giants grouped together, but it's also full of these mini giant scouts, and every single one of them can rapidly shoot rockets while also moving pretty fast. The second part is also projectile spam, most of it coming from the burning Mangler soldiers that make their return, as well as flare pyros. But as if things didn't get any worse, the final subwave brings out a chief soldier named the Concrete Crusher prototype. This is where the mission decides to turn the projectile spam up to 100, as this chief infinitely spams a stream of Mangler rockets. And not only that, the infinitely spawning Mangler soldiers in this finale means you'll be on fire 24/7. It's a horrible finale all around, and this mission overall is dragged down by the constant usage of teleport engineers that are all buffed up to further punish players that get pushed, and relies on too much spam towards the end. I hate to introduce it this early, but Tech Mechs earns an F. The third advanced mission is Unusual Onslaught. This was previously a Titanium tank mission that was in 21st place, with an overall score of 65. Compared to the other two on this map, this mission has its pacing slowed down by quite a fair margin. The giants on the first wave take way too long to spawn in than you would expect, and the comets will either spawn in small groups or combine into one from both sides. However, it'll proceed to jump the difficulty immensely with crit boosted bots on the second wave. Its first subwave was just a handful of soldiers and heavies, but you would expect them to be at least gate bots, right? There was the one gate tank that spawned after them but died immediately after, and I'm honestly not sure why it had to come alone. Besides that weird beginning, the wave didn't have too much going for it, but at the very least, this mission managed to restrain itself from letting Mangler soldiers burn players. But if that beginning is anything to go by, the waves have a consistent pattern of having the first subwaves not have gate bots, and on its last subwaves, still send out gate bots. I've already made this point earlier, but putting gate bots at the end wouldn't really accomplish anything since they wouldn't be able to pick up the bomb until they open the gate. Wave 4 has a gate tank that actually did start with robots alongside it. However, the two giant pairs were pretty short-lived even though the medic popped, and the same goes for the tank. Nothing really happens afterwards until you get to the midpoint where the Mangler soldiers that are now crit boosted can burn players. Wow. Then towards the end is, you guessed it, a gate bot finale. Both the giant burst fires and the blast soldier supports are gate bots. Yeah. In the final wave, you start by dealing with a couple of crit boosted bots, including giant burning Mangler soldiers, but past that, the mid-section is pretty much what you would expect out of the final wave. Interestingly, this wave is the only time it sends out an engineer support, which is a custom overclocked engineer that had just a bit more health than usual, and had a more powerful sentry gun, though I don't have footage of it happening. At the end, you'll face for what is the 3rd time in a row by this point, a chief soldier, whose name is Captain Coxswain. This is a rapid-fire Mangler soldier that deals double the damage and burns players on hit. How did you know? The only good thing about this chief is that, unlike every last subwave, it isn't a gate bot. But still, this mission really felt like the gate bots were treated as more of an afterthought, and places where you should and should not expect to see one don't exactly match up. Coupled with the slow pacing, I'd have to agree it was an Unusual Onslaught. Unusual Onslaught is D. The 4th and last advanced mission will be Extaterrestrial Epidemic. This is the first one-wave endurance mission we'll be covering, and it's the only one of its kind that isn't Halloween themed. As you'll notice, thanks to a recent game update, giants that are considered supports will now have their red backgrounds fully supported. This mission has a very good start pacing-wise, and is honestly quite comparable to the modern day. There is an adequate amount of bots on the field, and the spawn times are sufficient enough to where you aren't loitering around. But after the first subwave, it's where the cracks start to show. The second subwave was sent out the first tank, which is a gate tank, but the bots that would have come to support it are very few and far between here, so it's pretty easy to take down this tank. Somewhere around the 3rd of the way through, you will get some giant Natashas with giant medics, along with plenty of commons that still make this a relatively balanced subwave, but after this is where the pacing really starts to slow down. At the halfway point, there will be a weird sound effect that plays before it sends out an extremely tall chief demo called Explosive Canteen Monstrosity. This demo, as you can imagine, is extremely pyro and spy unfriendly, as it fires grenades all around them with a very short fuse time. It also has anti-body blocking, where it auto jumps every 5 seconds. Not sure why it's needed here, but it definitely wouldn't stop a soldier from stalling it out with Rocket Specialist. When you do kill this chief, the mission plays one of the most bizarre voice lines from the announcer. Then it gives you a midway break for about half a minute before continuing on. For the record, this whole gimmick isn't bad, but it's just confusing, since the administrator barely has any character in MvM besides telling you that there's a tank or to head to an upgrade station every wave. Sadly, this is where the peak of the mission ends, and the rest of the mission falls down a downward slope. The second half suffers from playing pretty generically, and the pacing is as slow as ever. Something also worth mentioning is how low the payout is relative to the experience. You start out with 1500 to work with, and come out with only around 1200 by the midpoint. So as you can imagine, the second half gets really boring, especially when the difficulty curve doesn't noticeably climb up all that much. The giant support that I mentioned earlier is a lesser form of the chief demo, except it is an unstable giant demo man that casts large explosions inside them that blast players away, but don't do that much damage. On the final subwave of the mission, you just deal with giant black boxes pocketed by giant vaccinators of different types. I know why they cluttered the screen with their health bars. It's because they had to reuse the soldier icon without bloating the wave bar too much. But much like the rest of the experience up to this point, this finale is weak and needed more. It's pretty disappointing. It was at its best on the first half, only to run out of interesting ideas by the end of it. The slow pacing and the low payout also muddied the experience. Extraterrestrial Epidemic is D. The second map on the list is Barren, and we have 2 advanced missions to play here. First of which is Dusty Dilemma. This mission has a lot of custom robots, and yep, this also includes a heater heavy that burns players on hit, both the common and giant variety. The way the mission plays itself out is pretty formulaic. Every wave has you dealing with 2 types of commons spawning slowly in the beginning, followed by a couple of giants that aren't too bad on their own, up until near the end where the wave takes itself serious and throws on a very tough giant or chief to deal with. For example, there's a giant pocket duo of a direct hit soldier and the medic at the end of wave 3. Ignore the fact that the soldier for whatever reason doesn't reload to full capacity, this medic has a chance to pop its Uber on low health, so if you don't prepare for the ass whooping that each wave pulls out at the very end, you will fail. Funnily enough, that same mistake I mentioned with the soldier carries over the crits medics throughout, where they don't crit boost unless they reach a low HP threshold. Over the course of the mission, the custom robots throughout will start to inherit arbitrary stat buffs. This is unfortunately not unusual, as we'll get further into Canteen Crasher, but this mission is one of the most egregious use cases of it. While some buffs are hardly recognizable at a glance or otherwise trivial, others will have buffs that make 0 sense and completely mess with your expectations, and most of the time it's gonna be for the worse. There's giant soldiers on wave 5, but they are not just giant soldiers. They stun, which is quite consistent with their custom made icon, but did you know that these guys also have 7,000 health? That they have their speed massively boosted, and its rockets dealing less damage but with triple the blast radius? It's insane, right? Yeah, many of you will point this out as just a nitpick, but this is a custom bot that's not even a chief. Custom bots shouldn't have their stats changed all willy-nilly. Health, damage, speed, pretty much anything that makes you have to think twice about a robot you were just shooting at. There's a guide on making custom missions that was made during Canteen Crasher's beta. It's an excellent resource that's still referenced by many mission makers to this day. There's a section going over the guidelines of designing custom bots, and one of them is maintaining consistency. You should expect custom robots to hover around the same health as their Valve standard counterparts. There's also a point on readability too. Health should be relative to the bot's size. You should expect their weapons to perform the way they were intended, and I'm adding on to this point here, but you should also expect their icons to communicate the proper information. I feel this tangent needs to be made just so you know why people don't design custom bots like these for Potato anymore. Anyways, the final wave starts out with a chief brass beast heavy named Polkov Misha, hope I said that right. This heavy is reused from the Unreal Wave 4, and while they are built to move slower, they are weirdly able to build a speed boost, but I've never seen them use it at all. You fight a few giants you've already seen up to this point, until you get to the finale bringing out the last chief, Sergeant Bovine Maimer. It's a Mangler soldier that slowly rapid fires rockets that cannot be deflected and marks for death. But this finale is mainly horrible due to the constant stream of heater heavy supports that burn players on hit. You really need to have Mad Milk or Conch to stave off the afterburn damage, which for veteran teams isn't saying much. For the effort that was put into the custom bots, they all didn't make for a fun addition. Too many of them have arbitrary and unnecessary stat buffs that backfires on the experience playing through the mission. I get that I want it to be challenging, but sadly, it wasn't a particularly interesting or engaging one at that. The waves were also structured almost the exact same, and not really deviating from the formula it had until the final wave. Thus the dilemma is F. The second advanced mission on Baron is Robotic Landscape, and it has 8 waves in total. Like many other missions, their pacing is relatively sluggish, especially when the waves try to end off. This mission features a couple heater heavies, and thankfully, they did not let these guys burn players on hit. So I guess this mission gets a plus from me, but so far, the first half of the mission isn't too bad. There are a couple of ideas that repeat themselves, like mini giant heavies that will always be featured within the first 4 waves, whether that be steel gauntlets with the Conjurer, or a tanker heavy that was able to regenerate half of its health on kill. And that's another thing with the mission too. Essentially all the custom bots here have to do with self-healing. Well, that's not to say that these bots are badly designed or anything. These guys would do exactly as their icons advertise. And in all honesty, I'd say this mission is fairly balanced all things considered. A few times where it gets slightly challenging was against the Big Rock Burst Fires that also came with a giant medic, but at the very least they're regen medics, so you won't be jump scared by a quick fix pop thankfully. Another instance is when the 7th wave spawns a whole bunch of teleporter engineer supports near the end. Again, it's fairly balanced where they're all limited spawns. Reaching the 8th and final wave is where you'll fight a bunch of chief soldiers. The Conqueror soldier, referred to as Conqueror Freedom, though I think you're supposed to say it like Conqueror Freedom. The buff banner soldier called Brutal Freedom, and the burst fire Quickness Freedom, sporting the highest health out of the 3. As far as chiefs go, this is more or less tolerable, but this finale is ruined by its overwhelming use of support bots. It starts off by spawning way too many engineers, and with all of them not being that challenging to kill, it is an obvious form of padding. There are also battalion soldier supports that will sometimes be around, which I find completely unnecessary with the rest of the buffs, on top of all the comet spam. While I consider the finale a badly designed one, the rest of the experience here is fairly decent. It still suffers from the pacing issues it has, but it also isn't filled with a lot of frustrating design choices. I'd say this is one of the better Canteen Crasher missions. Gonna give Robotic Landscape a B. Next map is Calico, and there's only one advanced mission to cover here. Though as far as I'm aware, this is not a map submission. It's also quite an obscure map that only one mission a few years from now would have picked up. The only mission we have here is Scabby Subordination. The pacing, as you'll notice throughout, can be quite slow, because the mission uses a lot of wave spawns where the bots come in small groups at a time. There is at least a custom bot to take note of, and it's this heater heavy shooting flares. Yep, it's another heater heavy that burns on hit, but I will gladly take a bot that is balanced around that fact instead of a hit scan robot that just happens to burn people. Somewhere around the midpoint, you're gonna be clued in on the mission's large spike in difficulty later. You've got giant pairs of burst fire soldiers with poppable medics at the end of wave 3, then the subsequent wave has its final section consist of giant rapid fires using battalions, as well as a few conch soldiers here and there. Wave 5 has a couple of super scouts and pairs of giant rocket range soldiers that spawn slowly from the right spawn point throughout. There's many many commons that pair alongside a few shield medics, but the wave will end with the giants that I mentioned earlier. And the 6th wave is where the difficulty spikes up. A plethora of soldiers ranging from nuke soldiers to banner soldiers, both of the giant and common variety. And those giant soldiers will have banners and medics as well, where the rapid fires have a buff banner with giant medics to pair alongside, while the burst fires at the end get to have a battalions along with the rest of the other banner soldiers, while also having uber medics as well. Did I mention that these guys are the big rock variants too? The final wave is where you fight 2 chiefs in the beginning and end separately. This is weirdly structured. The first chief is a heavy named Commander Crocus that can rapidly shoot rockets with his minigun. Yeah, we are trolling this chief with a medic, but at the same time, it's not fun fighting against it because it comes with a battalion's backup to add alongside their gigantic health pool. At some point, the mission sends out 2 tanks back to back, which definitely feels hollow if you've never been pushed back at all. The only supports here are the obnoxiously massive groups of spies on a half-minute cooldown. The second and last chief at the end is a pyro named Chief Carbonization that uses a man-melter with a fast fire rate. It's not really much to this pyro, to be honest, but at the very least, you can use crits to kill this thing faster. Overall, it's a somewhat decent mission that's just dragged down by its design choices on the second half. And for how weird the final wave's design was, I don't think it landed the way it wanted to. Scabby Subordination deserves a C. Casino City. The only map in Community MvM that has some form of gambling. I bet some YouTubers would enjoy playing on here. If you don't know how this map works, you're able to collect chips from the red briefcases some robots can bring out and drop. And you can spend them on some of the gambling machines of the map, and if you have enough, you can cash in on a few favors for one wave, including a helicopter, but we aren't here to gamble. Casino City is a map submission, and these types of submissions will always feature one intermediate and one advanced mission. This is also the point where we will now finally start covering intermediates. The first intermediate we'll cover is Poker Pummel. This mission is interesting in many aspects. You'll first notice the unique naming conventions that follows the map setting and gambling aspects. And of course, this mission has a gag of melee pyro supports throughout being named Poker Pummel. But as far as bot appearances go, many of them lack cosmetic features. The only unique cosmetic change I saw were the high roller rocket launchers that the giant soldiers were carrying from wave 1. As one might expect, there will be a lot of custom bots here. Many of them do have stat buffs, but also include stat nerfs. Those giant soldiers I mentioned earlier have the health decreased by 1,000 while also not reloading to full capacity, but strangely the latter applies to all giant soldiers here. You'd expect this black box at the end of wave 3 to fire in burst with their icon, but nope, this one is just a giant black box firing one rocket at a time. We'll encounter giant eviction notice heavies from time to time, but something must have broke here because their health drains at an extreme rate due to the attribute not being fully removed. The mission occasionally spawns giant medics, however they all have an obscenely low 1250 health, essentially removing all the difficulty from dealing with one. Now, I mentioned about stat nerfs, but what about stat buffs? Well, you aren't going to be seeing anything as egregious as Dusty Dilemma, but opposite to the stat nerfs, you'll just see boosts to the giant health pools. There are a few giant Tomislav heavies and giant soldiers later on that have their max health pool somewhere close to around 2 times the amount of health. For an intermediate, it's definitely more than a lot, but as far as pacing is concerned, it's one of the better missions that keeps the bots cycling through, with only a few times where some waves end sluggishly. I'm aware this mission is contradicting my earlier statements about the intermediates, but trust me when I say that Poker Pummel is a massive outlier within its category. Adding to all the custom bots, Wave 6 will feature one of the iconic features of the map, a sentry tank featuring 2 level 3 sentries on top, along with a little choo-choo's head to bite anyone in front of it. There's not really much build up to it, other than it just happens to spawn in. The wave doesn't end with her destruction. The final wave is where you'll fight the sentry tank again, except it's in the beginning. And then afterwards, you'll fight a chief coming out with 4 of the weak giant medics. This pyro is the Poker Face Grandmaster, and it uses a flamethrower that deals 5 times the amount of damage, as well as having extra air blast force, but I couldn't see it due to it having a low skill level. While the pacing is quite good with this one, the mission was also just being weird, with constantly changing the health pools of the giants throughout. You'll still get a decent experience out of this one. Poker Pummel is a C tier mission. The advanced mission on here is Cashgrab Chaos. This mission has a similar story in which the majority of robots are themed after the map itself. However, a massive difference between the intermediate and this is that now the robots have cosmetics. I mean, wow, talk about a difficulty increase. But for some reason, it decides to ditch the cosmetic appearances entirely after the first 2 waves. Not really sure what happened here. The wave lineups mainly consist of a large variety of commons to deal with. Not that it's a bad structure to work with, but the mission doesn't really deviate much from it, so it can be repetitive. The pacing is as good as the intermediate, with only a handful of subwaves where the mission drags, but it's still a plus overall. As far as small details go, the second wave has its giant soldiers pocketed by blast vaccinators, and as you might expect, they don't reload to full. At the end, it'll bring out giant enforcer spies, however, this part was very slow to finish off because the last one decided to cloak out and teleport to the last part of the map near the hatch. Wave 3 has a plethora of mini giant pyros using scorch shots, but you'll also see 12 giant boxing heavies throughout that will eventually become supports on the next wave, though this recording did not have support icons for giant supported, but let's just pretend I didn't record this last year or anything. Oh shit. Wave 4 doesn't have much going for it, though it will end very sluggishly with the use of common heavies backed by 3 vaccinators each. But as we get to Wave 5, it'll feature the signature sentry tank in the beginning, along with demos jumping high and parachuting to rain stickies from the sky. These guys have the broken animations where they twist and twirl, which must mean they haven't figured out how to fix them back then. That one single giant heavy on the wave bar appears at the very end, which will be a chief heavy. This heavy only has a health increase, but it does bring out a briefcase full of chips that, if you can kill them quick enough, can earn you a whole whopping 25 chips. Wave 6 is the finale, where you kill 3 sentry tanks back to back. There's also a single Tomislav heavy as part of the main lineup for whatever reason, but at the end is a chief, an engineer this time, called Mr. Texas Hold'em. They use a crit boosted pistol with double the fire rate and a larger clip size. They'll also come with a bunch of heavies and spies, along with Uber shield medics, though they hardly ever came to support the engineer themselves. This mission is less as exciting as the intermediate, but it still offers somewhat of a decent experience. Gonna give Cashgrab Chaos a C. Coming up, we have Coast Rock, and we have 2 intermediates to cover, as well as 1 advanced mission. The first intermediate is Coral Crusher. There is honestly not a lot of interesting details about this one. For the most part, you'll just be fighting a majority of commons with a few giants and tanks sprinkled here and there. As an experienced player, you are able to spawn camp due to the boss dying slowly in small groups at a time. Due to this fact, the waves can and will end sluggishly. This is not unique to any one intermediate, but it's just to provide some perspective when you're playing these intermediates. The one custom bot here that's commonly featured are these caber demos with this weirdly designed icon that makes you think they have some form of speed boost, but it's only to denote that they can shield charge. On the final wave, they'll use 99 of these cabered knights that spawn all the way to the end. There's also a map specific bot that this mission features, which are bomber soldiers that are able to jump high in the sky and use their parachutes. They're used as commons on wave 2, but on the final wave, they'll become giants that can now rapid fire, despite the icon obscuring that fact. Other than that, there's a giant heavy, I guess, and there's a final tank at the end before finishing off the last of the caber demos. Yeah, as I mentioned, not a lot really happens with this one. Coral Crusher gets a D. The second intermediate is Offcoast Invasion. Like the prior mission, it does rely on a whole bunch of common spam, but mostly in the first half of the mission. It's also paced a lot better by Canteen Crasher standards, with only a handful of times in waves 2 and 3 slowing itself down a bit. By wave 4, you'll start to see a drastic change in how the mission plays out, by using a larger variety of giants. This wave has nothing too hard to handle, but it's still quite a massive jump in terms of design. Though with wave 5, it won't have much. It will have giant fury powers that clutters the screen with their health bars, but much like the rest of the bots, you're gonna steamroll them without even thinking. The final wave has giant milk scouts that can slow down players, but doesn't offer much to support the bots. Then it ends off with a final tank and giant burst fires pocketed by common crits medics. Yeah, at this point, intermediates are starting to become far less interesting to talk about, and that's not entirely their fault since they were all designed to accommodate for newer players. This intermediate still manages to be one of the decent ones, but I would look elsewhere for missions that are more interesting to experience. Giving a C for Offcoast Invasion. The last mission on Coast Rock is an advance called Coastal Calamity, which has 4 waves. It starts off pretty well, but with a dash of annoyance, that being these parachuting Sandman scouts that jump high in the sky. I'm honestly not sure why they're referred to as Kamikaze scouts. This is one of those missions where they really want to take themselves serious by using strong types of robots along with tougher wave compositions. This endurance does come with mid-wave breaks for the next 3 waves, which is nice to see, but for any good players, this is quite unnecessary, especially with the measly low cash payout provided up to this point. Their first wave didn't have much of what was going on, though it's still a decent setup to what will be going on with the mission. I would say it would be nice, but the second wave kinda starts taking a turn for the worse. After the giant Bowman and common burst demo subwave, it'll be followed by groups of gas powers with the Explode on Ignite upgrade. It is a significantly reduced version of the upgrade thankfully, but they can still do plenty of damage with their afterburn. There's also these giant barrage demos that deal slightly more damage with a huge clip size. It would have been nice if they had an icon that was different from the burst fire fire demo icon. There's a subwave here with nothing but 3 banner soldiers paired with a giant burst fire for 4 squads straight. Then there will be 2 tanks rolling out with giant scouts dropping from up top, a bunch of commons that are honestly just filler up until the end that you face against giant crit boosted demos with Ubers, along with giant bomber soldiers that turn this finale into a complete mess, with absolutely nowhere to hide from those rockets. The third one will only spawn in if you kill at least one of them, so it's possible for this wave to end sluggishly. Wave 3 is where the mission will just go straight to expert. You've got 4 pairs of giant fury powers pocketed by giant shield medics, then there are groups of soldiers including battalions and black boxes, but there are also these mini giant bazooka soldiers that have very inconsistent firing patterns. Sometimes they fire in a barrage, and other times where they just tap fire you. Before you get to the mid-wave break, you have to kill the giant Natasha heavy paired with 3 giant vaccinators. This is among one of the more common tropes you'll see throughout. A giant that is supported by 3 vaccinator medics of varying types. That encourages some level of teamwork to a degree. But compared to the other times where this trope will get reused, this one for some reason has the resist bubbles last for a very significant amount of time, such that if you do get pushed to the hash without body blocking or cheesing, it's basically game over. Conversely, if you do decide to bring a spy here, this part becomes ridiculously easy. The wave will end off with swarms of mini giant loose cannon demos that are a real pain in the ass, along with 2 giant pairs of soldiers and medics that can pop their quick fix. Killing these giants will have a very weird Halloween jingle that plays, before spawning in 4 fast moving tanks that split off into 2 pairs. Interesting finale, I guess. Of all the waves, the 4th and final wave is the weakest. This primarily stems from the fact that it introduces a gimmick where the bomb path changes in the middle of the wave. However, unlike how it is handled today, the bomb path is a complete dice roll. Every minute will have the alarm sound, and it has a 50-50 chance of changing to the other side, but that other 50% will have the bomb path stay where it's at and change nothing. Other than that, the final wave doesn't have much compared to the prior waves, other than fighting crit boosted bots and giants. This is also the only wave that doesn't provide mid-wave breaks, which is fine by me. If you kill the 2 pairs of giant pyros early at the end, the finale slowly drags on due to the groups of heavies having very slow spawn times, and perhaps it'll end more slowly when the bomb path changes their direction unconditionally. This mission is definitely one of the more challenging experiences, but I can't say I had too much fun getting through most of the subwaves. The long mid-wave breaks here aren't too appropriate nowadays, though that's a bit subjective. And the final wave is pretty bad overall. Certainly not the best way to end the mission off. I'll give Coastal Calamity a D. Next map on the list is Condemned. Now, believe it or not, there were missions that preceded Trespasser, a mission that everyone believes is simultaneously the best and worst mission ever. But regardless of what you believe, one of the more commendable things Trespasser has done is that it went out of its way to make the map far more prettier than it actually did prior. Yep, this is what Condemned actually looks like. It's quite barren, unlike the map of the same name, but most importantly, this is a map submission. It has several spawn points up and down, and the bomb hatch is this generator that bots can deploy on. I'll be talking more about the map as we get through the missions, which are 1 intermediate and 1 advanced. And I wouldn't get your hopes up, because these older missions are going to offer the most jankiest experiences in all of Canteen Crasher. The intermediate is called Thriller Terror, with 5 ways to beat despite the wave bar obscuring that fact. As you might expect, it's gonna have a lot of zombie bots that are melee, though there will be ranged zombies and giants from time to time. All of these custom bots here have had their health buffed to compensate for the incoming damage, but for some reason also have ranged damage resist tacked on as well? What? It just makes no sense to combine both at once. This mission is also very unfriendly towards melee players since none of them have damage vulnerability, and most of the zombies can neither bleed on hit or have damage bonuses that can be so high that they can one-shot you. Perhaps even combine both attributes at once. Most of these zombies are commons, which isn't too bad, but the mission brings a lot of frustration which rarely spawn them throughout. As you see on the HUD down below, the map detects the presence of zombies on the upper and lower floor respectively. It's helpful for fighting the last robot to finish off, but it doesn't help the fact that the mission spawns robots wherever it pleases. This is how it feels like. Another point of frustration are these barricades among many of the map's doorways, completely separate from Trespasser. Whenever the zombies get close, they are able to lower down the barricade to open a new pathway, but if you or any player gets close to them, they can raise it back up. It's completely involuntary too, so sometimes you just might troll yourself by complete accident. When you get to the last subwave of the entire mission, you'll fight a demonic heavy zombie. Not much to it other than running around trying to punch. It's far from the worst intermediate I've seen, but boy does it offer a janky experience all around. I'm giving Thriller Terror a D. The advanced mission is called Unholy Undead. This mission is more or less the same as the other. The only differences are obviously the boss being tougher, but you'll also see more ranged zombies being used, as well as spy bots appearing on every single wave. However, the biggest problem now is that this mission is being unreasonably slow. No doubt thanks to the time quota for Canteen Crasher. Many of the bots can take forever to spawn in small groups, such that the bomb will constantly reset with its fast timer, so the mission is constantly forcing you to rotate between the upper and lower floors. Not only that, there's many moments throughout where there aren't really that many robots to shoot at, which is surprising coming from a zombie-themed experience. Wave 3 is where an additional bomb spawns on the field onwards, but as far as gameplay is concerned, the mission doesn't really do much with it, since it'll spawn on the same floor as the other in most cases. There's 2 chiefs in this mission, though to be honest they aren't much. One in the beginning of wave 4, which is a bottle demo named the Drunk Juggernaut Zombie, and the second one will be the only one to destroy in beating the final wave. A medic zombie named the Fallen Priest that uses an Uber Saw. You could probably just beat this boss in under 20 seconds. It may be the shortest advanced mission at 17 minutes, but the experience is pretty bad. And it's pretty easy to see how this map would have fallen off the face of the earth for being too gimmicky for its own good. But I guess we have Trespasser to thank for its resurgence. Still though, these 2 missions offer some of the worst experiences to get through. I'm gonna give Unholy Undead an F. Moving on over to Dockyard now, it's a Gatebot map, and it features only one advanced mission here, called Systemic Swarm. This mission reuses the ambush mechanic that was introduced in Spyro Shipping back in Titanium Tank. You're not gonna see it used too often, but much like how it was before, whenever ambush bots are featured in a specific wave, the gate opens silently after the first subwave, and the bots spawn in with an engineered teleport sound, including the tank that will appear in a later wave. The bots that were used for ambushes are what you expect, but only 2 of them had weird stat changes. Like the Ambush Scout for instance, they used to backscatter, but for some reason their mini crits from behind attribute are boosted to be full on crits, as well as this one and only giant ambush soldier that was able to shoot infinitely, but without shooting as fast as a rapid fire. But these are just minor nitpicks. In all honesty, the way this mission handles ambushing bots is fine. As for the waves themselves, it does start out fairly bland with not much to show for it, and there aren't many gate bots to be seen. The way it ends wave 3 though is pretty bad. The normal giant heavy surprises you by using the brass beast instead, and there's a bunch of soldiers and demos that burst fire in massive groups. Chances are they'll lag far behind from the heavy. Once you reach wave 4, it'll start to bring out more custom robots. It starts off with a chief mini crit on kill heavy before bringing out giant soldiers one at a time. No, seriously, these guys are spawning only one at a time. The demo supports only spawn 2 at a time throughout, so I have no clue why these giant soldiers are spawning on their own. There's a couple of heater heavies that, surprise, burn players on hit as they shoot out rockets. Wave 5 doesn't have much, though it'll have 2 ambushing giant heavies with some uber medics, as well as that teleporting tank that I mentioned earlier. And much like the third wave, it'll end slowly with the Dragon Fury pyros this time around. You'll start to see crit spam on wave 6, coming from the groups of Gatebot soldiers and the swarms of Bat Scouts appearing throughout. The one single giant demo that was crit boosted didn't have much going for it other than being a rapid fire, and the wave ends with the final tank and a couple of giant mini crit on kill heavies, before ending it off with one chief that needs to be killed on the next wave to beat the mission. The chief soldier here is named General Rapid Burst, that, as the name implies, is an amalgamation of a rapid fire and a burst fire into one. There are ambushing supports to help out, but a single sentry gun can keep them in check provided you are able to kill the chief fast enough. It's one of the more decent missions for sure, but it's got pacing issues to be seen, along with some of the subways being a little frustrating to deal with. Some of the custom bots aren't the worst I've seen though, and it does use its gimmick quite well enough. Systemic Swarm gets a C. Let's move on over to Doppler. This is a map submission, and it is a uniquely designed 3-stage Gatebot map. The first stage is pretty unique, where it is quite short and vertical, with 2 possible paths robots can spawn from. And as a map submission, we do have an intermediate and an advanced to cover. The intermediate here is called Shortwave. You'll be in the first area on the first wave, and the mission makes this area super easy to play in by only having robots spawn from one entryway each subwave. The only time it ever really uses 2 spawn points simultaneously is when the pyro spawn in with the soldiers and demos. Even then, still pretty easy. I won't be able to comment further on this area since the mission sends you to a new one each wave until the third one. It's also because this intermediate is extremely easy, which to be fair is on brand with the rest of the intermediates, but this one takes the cake for being the easiest out of all of them. As far as bots are concerned, not much to see in this mission, though you will see a couple of enforcer spies in the final wave. You will run into a chief demo at the end before finishing off the mission, which is a Sir Nuxolot with a hat. Yeah. This is by far the fastest to complete in Canteen Crasher at 14 minutes, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this mission was used the most for farming team contracts. But I can't just give an intermediate a high score for being completely effortless to speedrun through. At the very least, the pacing here never felt like it was slowing things down for the sake of time. I'm gonna give Shortwave a C. The advanced mission for Doppler is called Force Restart. This mission has its first wave be the only one that starts out with 2 bombs at once, and unlike the intermediate, this mission simultaneously uses both spawn points to split off players. Quite a lot of comments after the first 2 giants spawn in, but we're off to a good start for an advanced. Progression is the same as the intermediate, where you progress stage after stage until you get to the 3rd wave. This mission for the most part is pretty standard, but it also offers a decent experience. The pacing, I would say, is also quite good as well. There's a lot of robots that are used to spawn in massive clusters, but at the very least, there's only a handful of times where the mission slows down. This mission only has 2 chiefs in the mission. One on wave 4 with an ordinary chief blast soldier, with the minor inconvenience of engineers teleporting in constantly to help it capture the gate. And there's one at the finale, but I'll get to them in a bit. There is a very bizarre trope this mission has going for it though. For every wave past the first, and before the last one, you are going to be seeing giant crits medics and uber medics constantly. But what the mission loves to do is pair these groups of medics together to pocket one single giant. It does this with the last remaining giants at the end every single time, but wave 5 is where you start seeing them used in the beginning for the first time. The final wave has a lot of giants, but most importantly, a lot of enforcer spies seen from the intermediate. 8 of them are giants, and they are all squatted with the giant soldiers using the battalions and buff banners respectively. They can't cloak out if they are the only one alive. At the end is the second chief that I mentioned earlier, a spy chief this time by the name of the Spy with the Golden Gun. Quite a mouthful. Its ambassador can basically one-shot you, though if you bought Uber Canteens or a shield medic to harass this chief, you won't be seeing anyone be turned into gold. But all things considered, it's still a good mission at the end of the day. I think part of it is carried by the map's layout, which plays pretty well. But while there are plenty of flaws throughout the mission, I wouldn't say that I was disappointed with this one. Force Restart will be the first to receive an A. Next map on the list is Downtown, and here we have 3 advanced missions to go over. First of which is Robo Centralization. This mission utilizes a lot of gate bots that split across both sides at front. Oftentimes, it can be pretty annoying because the vast majority of them are scouts. At certain points, the mission will utilize the elevator at the front to spawn certain giants. They only ever spawn 2 types of heavies on wave 2, a heater heavy that doesn't burn on hit, thank god, and a deflector separately. Then at the end of wave 3, they'll have a counter barrage pocketed by a giant medic. The mission intended for me to keep this spawn point in mind, but honestly I'd forgotten about it because there was a very significant time gap before it gets reintroduced on wave 6. Other than that, the mission is pretty slow when it comes to tackling each and every subwave. Wave 4 probably the most sluggish to get through because both the beginning and ending subwaves have you dealing with Blasting Brigader, who is a chief rapid fire blast soldier. The ending subwave being the biggest offender because it throws in gate bots for half a minute before you can go fight against the second Blasting Brigader. There's not that many custom bots, though the one I found most frustrating to deal with were the hyped fire spreaders that were just smaller sized pyros that were also able to move faster. In the final wave, you deal with 2 chief gatebot pistol scouts that could heal on hit. In my playthrough, this was the only time the bots ever managed to capture the first gate. They were there to help the next 3 chiefs spawn closer to the hash, a Devilman named Mad Bomber that burst fired a barrage of pipes like diarrhea, and 2 medics using Quick Fix and Uber respectively. All things considered, it's an alright mission. Robo Centralization deserves a C. Next is Downgrading System. This advanced mission was a prior entry into Titanium Tank's contest, only managing 14th place with an overall score of 73. It has a rather bland first wave all around, but after that, it starts deploying a lot of custom bots. Some of the designs are just fairly weird. You have armored fan scouts that are able to shoot 4 shots instead of 2 like normal, and at some point the mission will buff pre-existing bots to deal more knockback on hit, even though the effect itself is kind of minimal. Strangely, and I mean very strangely, there was a giant soldier in wave 2 that the icon tells you that it's a burst fire and acted like one too, but it was named Giant Rapid Fire Soldier. This is only ever a thing on wave 2 because every other burst fire soldier used onwards is named correctly. This mission, much like the prior one, also uses the elevator spawn point, but it uses it quite often enough to where you can figure out the pattern. Towards the later half, it will really start encroaching towards expert. The custom scouts up to this point will culminate into a unique gatebot chief to start off wave 5. This scout is named the Public Enemy, and it uses a rapid fire babyface's blaster shooting half as much pellets as a giant shotgun heavy. There are plenty of giant demos here, and all of them have giant vaccinators of 3 types supporting each one, which is pretty overkill. But this wave also also comes with an assortment of common heavies. The ones in the beginning especially have lots of medics per pair. And on the final wave, it starts off with giant shield medics supporting giant brass beast heavies. Though in all honesty, this finale itself is quite mediocre. It mostly relies on spamming commons in large groups, and after the crit boosted giants that you already fought in the past, you just deal with 2 tanks and the infinite support. This would definitely be a different story if it was for a team that got pushed out of the first area. I just think it's a bland finale. I do have to iterate that custom bots are not inherently wrong to use, but this mission has the kind of bots that are full of hidden stat changes that you wouldn't expect to see. Sure, at the end of the day, the mission played fine, but it wasn't exactly fun constantly having to ask myself why they purposely designed the robots that way. Regardless, Downgrading System deserves a C. The last mission of this map is called One Down, which is a one-wave endurance with some Halloween flavor. Though by the time of recording, the archive servers broke the theming, so most of these nightmare missions are just full of humans instead of zombies. It still functioned fine though. This mission gives a pretty high amount of starting cash, and it's immediately apparent that this starting cash is the sole reason for how piss easy the whole mission is for 20 minutes. I mean, come on, the bots here hardly ever pose as a challenge due to the upgrades you're able to max out right off the bat. The mission does gradually send out more bombs, but the flat difficulty curve for 95% of the mission, as well as the iconic Canteen Crasher pacing, means that it's possible to fall asleep in the middle of playing. But that in itself is a challenge, because for whatever reason, the last 5% of the missions where it suddenly decides to super buff itself at the very end. There is this one Persian Demo Knight that spawns randomly throughout, and that Demo Knight, when all of the buff banner soldiers pocketed by medics spawn, will suddenly become an endless stream of stampeding Demo Knights. For any team that gets pushed beyond the first area, this is an unfairly designed finale, as 1,000 Demo Knights are capable of flanking and can swarm around the bomb, and it just makes the ending of this mission extremely awful to play. The 3 bombs at this point effectively cannot be reset and requires at least half the team to camp them, and if you can't capture the points before the final chief spawns in, it's basically game over, which means spending an extra 20 to 25 minutes of going through a slog of shooting fish in a barrel. The final chief that I mentioned is a soldier named Brigadier Barrage. They're essentially a more accurate Colonel Barrage that shot a little more faster and have a slightly smaller clip size, but it's able to crit boost on kill for 5 seconds. Even if the ending could have been designed to be far less harsh, this mission is mostly dragged down by the sluggish pacing, as well as the high starting cash that makes the experience up until the finale pretty trivial and boring. One Down is a D tier mission. Alright, now we're heading over to Giza. This map is rather infamous for its map layout, but it also hosts one of the more notorious missions from an operation out in the distant future. But before that point, there were 2 missions from Canteen Crasher, both of which are advanced. First of which is Pyramid Peril. This is a returning mission from Titanium Tank that previously held 10th place with an overall score of 78. This mission is a pretty simple one, but even though it doesn't have much to talk about, like custom bots for example, it's still a competently built mission all around. The gate bots here are split across point B, which is the path the bomb always goes towards, and point A. The ones that go to point A are relatively easy, nothing that really demands more than 2 damage dealers to handle, which in all honesty is the perfect way to handle a map of this caliber. The mission overall is decently paced, but the ending subwaves are all pretty repetitive. They usually end the waves with a giant that slowly creeps in with a medic or several of them, and while they do happen to change what they are specifically, beyond wave 2, it's just different flavors of giant soldiers. The final wave doesn't have much to write home about, aside from having quite a lot of crit boosted bots around, but this campaign has given me 2 nickels for the fact that this mission also has a giant burst fire that's just named Giant Rapid Fire Soldier instead. And what, people are telling me this is a bot copied over from Metro Malice? You have gotta be kidding me. The final wave will slowly end off with 3 giant battalion rapid fire soldiers back to back. If you have a spy on the team, you may not experience much from them, making for a flat ending. This still remains as a decent mission all around, but it was done with a team that could hold both gates for the majority of the game, so take that with a grain of salt. For what I've seen, Pyramid Peril gets a B. The other advanced mission is called Wrath of the Pharaoh, another nightmare themed mission, but it has 6 waves to beat. To start off with, the mission gives you a really high starting cash of 2800. I guess this is to compensate for the boatload of custom bots with fundamental design changes and stat buffs. The first wave wasn't too shabby, though it was constantly throwing in gate bots throughout that essentially makes 1 person or 2 to camp on A side for a good while. The gate bots in this mission are marked with the Pharaoh cosmetic, which is interesting to see. The second wave is also somewhat decent, but for some reason it decided to end it off by having the last 2 giant deflectors be gate bots. They dragged their wave far longer than it should because they weren't pushing with the bombs out at all. Wave 3 is where you'll start to feel the mission dragging out with their spawn times, but for the amount of cash to work with, we were blitzing through most of it. The 4th wave has a weird start. It started with a pocket duo that was between a giant and a chief, and they're marked with the Bill's hat in their icon. These giants were just a rapid fire that shot faster, along with a poppable quick fix medic, and the mission describes them as buffed variants. This 4th wave is honestly strange all around. It reuses the 3 vaccinators 1 robot trope, but the pairings are all common sized. The wave later had a giant demo pocketed by not 1, not 2, but 3 giant crits medics that hardly provided any healing. Then it ends off with 12 jumping super scouts and giant heavies that push you on hit. Wave 5 doesn't have much for me to complain about, but it does use another buff giant medic being the regen variant. And check it out, it's a heater heavy that fires rockets but can also burn players on hit. But don't worry, because this isn't the only heater heavy template on this mission. This wave does like to spawn massive groups of crit boosted commons, but it does carry over some of the bizarre design choices, like sending out 16 giant gatebot scouts at the very end back to back. It's not a particularly great subway to end on, especially as someone who had to stick to A, holding them off for the next minute and a half. As if the prior waves didn't have unusual wave designs, the 6th and final wave starts with a squad of 4 giant bomb scouts carrying the bomb. Then, you have to deal with 2 chief jumping sandmans capturing the gates so that they can try to spawn a final chief from there. The chief heavy's name is Hulgadala the Pharaoh, and look, I know many of the chiefs in this era use hat icons, but you can't tell me this icon doesn't look extremely ridiculous. This heavy is the only other heater heavy that burns on hit, except this one has an infinite burn duration with a little extra burn damage. The supporting heavies are also... Seriously, how many fucking times does a burn on hit robot get used over the course of this campaign? This mission didn't play too terribly from my experience, but it does have a lot of goofy subwaves, and honestly I could overlook a few details, mostly because it was designed around the high currency. Wrath of the Pharaoh deserves a C. Next map on the list is Hideout. This is a map submission, which means we have 1 intermediate and 1 advanced mission here. The intermediate is called What the hell is this, man? Nope, this is not a joke. The mission's title is actually just called Intermediate. The only logical conclusion I can come up with is that the map creator just didn't think about creative names for their missions, so we're stuck with this. I guess you might consider this as a tech demo then, because it's unfortunate that this mission is the very definition of repetitiveness and bad pacing. There are common bots, but they will either be in their own squads featuring no more than 3 at a time, be used as stream spawns 1 at a time for some reason, or be a part of the giant squads throughout, which will always feature medics. You might get a larger squad here and there, and some engineer bots that will come in on waves 4 and 5, but Jesus, the pacing on this one is just not good. Every wave is dragged out sluggishly by the slow spawn times of basically everything that you might call it sleep-inducing. The only other interesting detail this has is its final subwave, a chief duo consisting of a Sun on a Stick scout named Sunburn Sam and a Degreaser pyro named Blazin' Barney. But if you play through Entertainer's Entourage from Titanium Tank, you would have already seen this otherwise uniquely designed trope. While the bots here are fine for what they are, the extremely slow pacing here holds this mission far back from being a decent one, such that the mission genuinely feels like it was wasting your time, which is among the worst feelings you can get out of a mission. Intermediate gets an F. Hey, guess what the advanced mission is called? Yep, Advanced! And just like with the intermediate, the mission's pacing is far below standard, but it might as well just be called expert because the first wave is badly designed. A pretty big reason for that is the engineer that teleports in. We got unlucky on one try and had this engineer teleport behind us and had its sentry able to shoot through the opening of this prop. It's an unfairly designed spot. A lot of the map is open with hardly any side cover, and the mission brings out a lot of hit scan including giant heavies and scattergun scouts that, if unchecked, can snowball into massive hordes. And to make things worse, you gotta deal with 2 groups of giant rapid fire soldiers pocketed by 3 Ubers at the end of the wave. It's a pretty bad start if you ever get pushed, but right after that, the difficulty dips, and the pacing of the mission moves to a slow moving crawl. The same thing that happened in the intermediate is what's happening here. Robots spawning 1 at a time, and seeing no more than 3 robots spawning in a group. Though, the mission at least tries to be interesting by the 3rd wave. You've got giant burst fire soldiers to start off that are pocketed by giant shield medics. Not much much happens besides the tank, but the wave ends off with the chief rapid fire bowman by the name of Archie Archer. I wish I could say more, but there really isn't. The fourth wave is defined by its weird obsession with multiples of 10, and its lineup largely full of banner soldiers that have their own respective vaccinators with full immunity. There is a body block check with the 3 armored Sandmans here though, and the wave ends pretty badly, just one tank to deal with and the rest of the 20 heavies. The final wave is pretty bloated with a bunch of bots that are honestly not much to talk about, so I'm skipping towards the end. A chief heavy named Tom the Tourist that uses a crit boosted Tomislav. This is the only crit boosted bot in the whole mission, and we all forgot to buy crit resistance, so they managed to make it towards the hatch. Overall, this mission is not really good. Its introductory wave isn't well designed, and much of the experience is ruined by the sluggishly slow pacing. It certainly had some interesting ideas, but it didn't exactly impress. I'm giving Advanced an F rating. Up next on the map list, we have Isolation. We have 1 intermediate and 2 advanced missions this time. The intermediate here is Turbulence Tumult. It has a very slow start of just a couple of shortstop scouts only before sending out the rest of the bots. Other than that, I'd say that the first half of the mission has some decent portions. The pacing here is alright for what it is, aside from a couple of times where the mission just waits too long before spawning more robots. Not many subwaves stood out, though this first half certainly like to use multiple variations of one class of robot for their final subwaves, and they also spawn a lot of support bots to pad out the waves. And just when I stopped thinking about them, this mission does feature Mangler soldiers that burn players on hit. But hey, at the very least they have the courtesy of visually showing that their Manglers can do that. That's gotta be balanced, right? When you get past wave 3, however, the mission loses its momentum and becomes bland, and the pacing becomes noticeably sluggish. I think this mission was trying to be in advance because there's a lot of tough variants of giants being used here, yet with hardly any other bots around to try to maintain its intermediate label. There's also a lot of tanks being used here. You'll see 4 tanks used simultaneously on the 4th wave before having less tanks be present as you move onwards. In regards to the chiefs, this mission has 3 in total. 1 on wave 3 where after the many giant Sandmans, you fight a Chief Sandman, which is just the unused Major League template without the ridiculous speed bonus. Then on wave 6 at the end are 2 Soldier Chiefs at once, and they are just Kernel Barrages but with a massive health boost and slightly less damage. That's basically it. So first half is decent, second half is not as decent. Turbulence Tumult earns a D. The first of the 2 advanced missions here is called Icecold Insurgency, and the pacing here is pretty much on brand with Canteen Crasher. It's quite sluggish. A lot of the wave spawns in the first half of the mission are squatted, including the giants that can culminate into extremely spongy walls with the use of armored mini-giants from time to time. As you notice, there's plenty of custom bots throughout. One example are the parachuting soldiers, similar to the ones from Coast Rock, but they all jump much higher in this one. They're only used 2 times in the mission, but in every single case they drag out the mission further than they need to. But for the most part, the first half is fine. But wave 4 is definitely the worst one to get through. That is, if your team isn't able to take care of the shield medics that are uniquely able to crit boost their pockets on top of it. At first, they'll pocket of 3 giant soldiers that, alongside the stronger common boss and a few giant scouts, they're all able to push pretty hard. Then at the end, they'll pocket giant fury pyros with 1 battalion soldier per pairing. This wave also has random choice heavy support spawning slowly non-stop that are able to snowball towards the hatch if you push far enough. Wave 5 is a much less steeper climb in difficulty, though you'll see plenty of bots reused here. It has trios of giant escape plan soldiers, weirdly, but you'll fight a chief frost nuke soldier at the end. That doesn't deal as much damage as you'd expect, but can slow you down for a good bit. If you got the right team for them though, you'll finish them off faster than the Demo Knight spawning alongside them. The final wave starts very annoyingly, with its first group being walled off by a bunch of shield medics stacking together. There's also a chief medic that comes with a shield initially, but switches off as soon as their pocket dies, and starts shooting out nukes with their crossbow. They call themselves Sergeant Blitzkrieg, a neat chief to fight against, all things considered. Besides that, the whole first half is filled with a bunch of projectile spam, all coming from the soldiers and cluster bomb demos, and there's also these scorch shot pyros that will snipe you from across the map. After all of that, the wave is pretty much free since the difficulty dips, and with not much else to see. This mission had a decent start all around, but the extensive use of custom bots over time did make the experience suffer for it towards the end. I'll still give Icecold Insurgency a C. The second and last advanced mission here is Manstorm. The mission has a decent starting half, plenty of bosses to shoot at with not much to complain about. While the pacing here is somewhat better, there are a lot of short breaks in between them that can interrupt the flow of the mission. There's not much in the way of custom bots starting out, but you'll see plenty in the first half that have just a little extra effect tacked onto them, whether it be a conch buff, being able to heal on hit, or just bleed on hit. Nice lowercase bowman there. There are a lot of scout bots being used here though. Many times the mission mission will spawn them in massive groups while having some sort of a bigger scout bot to go along with. Once again, this first half is good for what it is. Unfortunately, the fourth wave is where things start to go downhill. This wave in particular has a pretty egregious difficulty spike, where after the many groups of black boxes and demo knights, you got groups of highly skilled heater heavies on wave 4 that turned the subwave into hit scan hell, thanks to their buff banners that were also tacked on. The fifth wave uses a lot of combos that form into massive groups. It has a lot of projectile spam in the beginning, but for the most part, it plays as any generic mission. The sixth and final wave has a bunch of giants, starting out with giant pairs of heal and kill heavies, the first two of which are paired up with a conch and banner soldier respectively, while the next pair is having one conch pairing and the other a giant crit creep pocketing them. The second half of it isn't too great. There's the final tank, but beyond that, the entire finale is just filled with these hyped fire spreader pyros seen prior, except now they have a custom icon. As for why they're not crit boosted at this point, it's because towards the end they will be, but will also upgrade to become mini giants and move much faster than before. This wave also features heater heavies, but they are weirdly designed. They have something that's the opposite of burning players on hit. They instead have the extinguisher attribute that cleanses the afterburn in exchange for crit damage, and refer to themselves as ice burner heavies. Interesting bot design, I guess. Man, I didn't expect the map to feature 3 missions back to back that start off well and good before finishing off on a mediocre note. This mission at the very least had better pacing, but I'm not sure if the second half was enough to make up for that fact. It had a few difficulty spikes along some rather bland subways along the way, but I'll at least give this one some merit for having its finale feel like an uphill battle to end off on. I'm gonna give Manstorm a C. Let's move on over the metro. There's an intermediate and an advanced to go through. Steel Skyline is the intermediate mission here, and it's quite on the repetitive side of things. More often than not, you will be encountering giants that will be put into squads. Few that are what you would expect, but on occasion, you'll just have them with common bots of the same class. They will be used a lot to end each wave off. There's a couple of single giant spawns, but they don't get a shine in the spotlight since they all die very quickly. Something that will be noticed throughout are the bot icons, where those of the same type are split across the main wave and support. Not that this is unusual or taboo, but it's just another weird detail to remember this mission for. With the wave lineups that get increasingly bloated over time, there really isn't much to write home about, but once you get to the finale of the mission, you'll fight a chief soldier named Marshal Megaton. Basically a slower firing charge soldier that deals quadruple the damage. That's pretty much it. A fairly generic intermediate with some repetitiveness to the overall experience. Gonna give Steel Skyline a D. The advanced mission is called Evil Eye, and it has 4 waves to beat. This was previously submitted for Titanium Tank, and it was so close to getting into the event before ultimately ending up in 7th place. It was tied with Power Palliative for 6th place, but that mission was chosen over this one because the beta testers thought that should be the winner. The beginning of Evil Eye, I would say, is pretty solid. It uses quite a lot of melee bots ranging from Steel Gauntlets to Bat Scouts.
Oh, that's real nice.
This mission has custom bots, but unlike all the others, this one wants to be all weird and quirky too. You'll see the obvious size differences between these melee fodders, where some of them are just a weird hybrid between a mini giant and a common bot. And as you'll see throughout, many of the bots will follow weird naming conventions. Just to name a few, Maybe I Reflect Pyro, SMG snipers called COD snipers, and a Sentry Busters straight up just called Attributes Always Crits. This mission not only wants to be strange, but it also wants to be challenging on top of it. And while the first wave played out pretty well, I have to say that wave 2 is not well designed. It starts with giant banner soldiers of varying types and plenty of pyros including scorch shot spammers. The last 2 giant soldiers would group up together to bind both conch and battalion effects while bringing out crit boosted demo knights that all make for a really high difficulty spike if you can't keep up. Then later on, the wave brings out 3 tanks that converge together as one. It's weird and quirky, but this whole last half of the wave is still pretty bad. It's pretty easy to kill these 2 groups of tanks really fast, and doing so will leave you with nothing else but to sit and wait, as the commons sluggishly drag out the rest of the wave for a good while. Wave 3 thankfully picks up the slack, a plethora of bowmen alongside a couple of giant steel gauntlets, and then later dealing with giant demo men, one of which is a burst fire but has been super buffed to shoot more pipes at an even faster rate. This wave also uniquely features the support tank, one that spawns periodically throughout. My only issue with this tank design is that if you get super unlucky with the timing, like our team have, it can spawn at the very last second, which drags out the wave. The final wave bar is inflated with a lot of supports, mainly consisting of a variety of medics. They will just appear periodically, and the targets they choose to pocket are pretty random, from the 2 types of giants to the mini giant but not really soldiers and scout supports. There is one last tank here, though I think the creator forgot to put the final tank skin on them. The last half of the final wave is pretty slow. The few remaining main commons take forever to spawn in, but it's all to set up for the chief of the mission, a Captain Punch variant called Captain Crush that uses a double damage KGB that can crit boost for an entire minute. Even then, they don't take that long to kill them, and the mission can end off with some straggling bots. The experience was relatively challenging, but I would say the waves themselves maintain a fair balance in handling the bot compositions, aside from wave 2 of course, but besides that, none of the custom bots were too egregious or overtly offensive. But with that being said, the mission definitely has a lot of moments where the wave drags on far longer than it should, which isn't too great. I can see why this mission couldn't make it into Titanium Tank, but overall it still manages to provide decent fun and it's worth checking out. Evil Eye earns a B. Moving on over to Outlands now. We've got another new map submission featuring one intermediate and one advanced mission to play through. The intermediate is called Backwoods Blockade. The mission starts off with an onslaught of punchies and steel gauntlets in both directions at the front. This first wave is extremely fast paced such that it ends in close to a minute. After that though, the mission plays out as your usual fare, but if there's anything important to write home about, it's the extremely weird naming conventions the mission has going for it. Commons are referred to as boy, mini giants referred to as guy, and giants are referred to as badass blank man. The blank being there because the mission goes out of its way to describe every robot with a word relative to what each one does, and that goes for all variants. I'm guessing the creator was a massive fan of Borderlands back in the day. Other than the weird naming conventions, the gameplay doesn't have a lot going on, and you will be spawn camping the mission. As good as the pacing was in the beginning, over time you'll really start to feel it slow down as the waves continually add more subwaves to them. The final wave has a large variety of custom bots, but it will mostly consists of 3 types of banner soldiers throughout, even going as far as to ending it off with a chief banner trio at the very end. But for being considered as chiefs, their names aren't too far off compared to the giants. Definitely should have been called super badass bannermans, something whatever, I don't know. While there are a lot of weird things going on with this mission, there's not really much to speak of in terms of gameplay. Backwoods Blockade is D. The advanced mission is called Midnight Mutiny, and much like the intermediate, the mission follows the same odd naming conventions. While the pacing is far better compared to the other advanced missions, the first 4 waves of it are pretty generic and nothing to write home about, although there are a couple of weird stat changes to a few bots. For example, there's the engineer supports that walk in that not only drop money on death for some bizarre reason, but also comes with a small health regen of 1. Same goes for the steel gauntlets that appears far later that also regenerate by a small amount, though upon looking further, it's to help them display their health bar above them. It's still a pretty bizarre design choice, since it's the only mission in Canteen Crasher that does this. As we get to the later half, the difficulty curve will start to spike up, with the 5th wave being a huge case of it. Here, it introduces a chief heavy by the name of Iron Gibbous Mark II. A very strange name considering it doesn't fall under the naming conventions of the mission at all, but I could overlook it for being a boss. This heavy uses the brass beast that dealt 2 times the damage and crit boosted on kill. Not only that, at some point the wave will jump scare you with a swarm of Dragon Fury pyros, and all of the bots present can push you towards the hatch. Later on, there's swarms of buff banner soldiers along with giants to deal with, but there's a pretty big oversight where the creator forgot to rename these giant demonites to something else like badass swordman, I don't know. Then in Canteen Crasher fashion, the wave ends very sluggishly, with the last 12 battalion soldiers and the remaining bat scouts that take a few business days to spawn. Wave 6 doesn't really have much going on, aside from some interestingly designed common bots, though onwards it will start to deploy custom spies using kunais, and then later using eternal reward spies. The 7th and final wave introduces yet another chief again. You'll never guess what this one's name is. Big Snowball Dude. The soldier burst fires his rockets like a shotgun blast. I don't get it. Where's the big Snowball Dude? After that is gonna be a tank that spawns behind, and then super scouts that appear periodically for 11 times throughout. There's some charged soldiers here, but weirdly they use the standard rocket launcher instead of the original. Then the mission ends with a lot of comments as well as the super scouts mentioned before and 11 giant heavies back to back. Yeah, as you may have guessed, the mission will peter out in a repetitive fashion. Honestly, a pretty disappointing way to end the mission off, because everything else for the most part has been fairly decent. That is, if you ignore the slow pacing of the overall experience. Midnight Mutiny earns a C. Next map on the list is Oxidize, another map submission with one intermediate but does feature 2 advanced missions. Snowy Slaughter is this map's intermediate. I wish I could say this one is decent, but it isn't. It's really bad. It has an excessive use of long wait times between spawns that makes the experience quite tedious. This first wave is among the worst, since the mission spawns giants with Ubers much faster than it could spawn the rest of the 50 pyros. At that point, the wave plays out like it's normal difficulty, and I haven't gotten to the 5 other waves this mission has going for it. The pacing of this mission can range from flowing somewhat decently to a complete standstill, as you sit around waiting for robots to spawn several seconds after the next one, and it can get so extremely egregious that you might actually fall asleep. I mean, look at the starting subway for wave 5. Why are the heavies the only ones spawning, yet they take forever to do so? The second subway finally spawns giants, but they are so little and far between that the tanks do literally nothing. But it gets worse than that, as the ending is just 5 giant Scorch Shot powers back to back. Just why? This is honestly so perplexing, man. This just feels like an advanced mission that was cut in half to meet its difficulty requirement. There's some strong giants used, like Kernel Barrages, Vaccinator, and Shield Medics that can pop Uber, and that's just Captain Punch. Yeah, that's just Captain Punch with its health and regeneration reduced. You know, something is just hilarious about the final boss of one of the hardest Valve missions being reused as a mid-level boss in a community intermediate mission. This mission does have a few bots of its own, like giant heal on hit Fury Pyros, and then the giant scouts that use the babyface blaster on wave 4, and with their health that's boosted to be as high as the giant soldiers. The final wave is nothing special, aside from starting out with a bunch of shotgun heavies with Ubers to solve for time. None of the giants here were anything to write home about, and the mission will struggle with its last remaining banner soldiers. Yeah, definitely one of the intermediates I've ever seen. Gonna give Snowy Slaughter an F. The next mission is an advance called Frosted Furnace. The first wave of the mission started out relatively generic, with the comments ending the wave extremely sluggishly. And what I mean by that is that the second half of it is just 2 separate sub-waves back to back of just 20 pyros and heavies. I don't even understand. The second wave is kind of the same story, but with a few things to differentiate itself, such as it only featuring 1 custom bot, a giant freeze flame pyro that can slow players on hit. As we get to wave 3, the mission will really start deviating away from the norm. It spawns giant demos and demonites in trios at the start before bringing out a Kernel Barrage with the giant medic. But the final subwave here is poorly designed. It's similar to the ending of wave 1, except you're just fighting 5 deflectors with 1 medic in small groups. Quite a flaccid ending, honestly. The mission proceeds to use more freeze flame pyros as common support. Besides that, there's a constant use of giant battalion soldiers and tanks throughout wave 4. There's more custom bots in wave 5, but reuses the same ideas it had before, with squads of Natasha heavies with a shield medic and giant freeze flame pyros with a couple Ubers. The second half of it is just projectile spam, and all these soldiers are conch boosted from the giant soldiers paired alongside giant deflectors. Then it ends off with swarms of crit boosted direct hit soldiers that don't do much, but it probably would have been a disaster if we didn't finish everything else before they spawned. Wave 6 is where it now starts becoming a soup full of custom bots, and its many subways mostly comprise of 1 damage type that goes along with the type of giant vaccinator medic, which I find neat, until the mission throws that away and makes these giant deflectors burn on hit with Hulong heaters. Real funny. The ending subwave has far less robots to shoot at, but much of the pushing power comes from the big rock burst fires and super scouts. And what do you know, the wave drags out with commons at the end. What I didn't expect afterwards was the final wave being an entire wave full of crit spam. But to be fair, this mission has been giving a gargantuan amount of money per payout that you could buy pretty much anything. After waiting an excessively long wait time at the end, you'll encounter a chief soldier named General Rocket 12 Gauge that shoots rockets with its shotgun, go figure. They're not that strong, but they do have a huge blast radius that gets boosted with its rocket specialist. This mission really does have its issue with transitioning over to the next wave, but beyond that, the experience is fine considering all the bots weren't too frustrating to deal with. I'll give Frosted Furnace a C. Corroding Cadavers is the last advanced mission for this map, and it's a nightmare-themed 1-wave endurance. The beginning of this mission is pretty good. A lot of the bots here have decent pushing power relative to the high starting cache, and the difficulty scales well here, by adding in a few unique giants to spice things up a bit. The pacing here is also good, where no subwave drags out far longer than they should. Like many of the 1-wave endurances, this mission also adds in mid-wave breaks. I'm not sure why they chose to do it like this, but whenever the breaks end, they decide to stun everybody on the entire map, map, including the bots. The bomb holograms will also flash a couple of times before continuing onwards, which is neat, but to reiterate what I said from way back when, with a good team, this is kind of unnecessary. Also, the mission support can still spawn during the break here, and if you happen to be super unlucky, the door at the front upgrade station can crush you to death, but at the very least, the path actually changes, which is good. After this first break, you will encounter a lot more custom robots throughout. While some of these bots are interesting, like giant demos that shoot a burst of pumpkin bombs, others are badly designed, like these small imp pyros that can deal bonus afterburn damage. Then there's the demo knights that have their melee range scaled up pretty high. There's also bots with weird and unnecessary stat changes. It's hard to tell from a glance, but many of these bots are scaled up a bit, or have a slight speed buff, or maybe perhaps even both. These are just nitpicks, but I really don't think these tiny changes are necessary. At the halfway point, you'll encounter the only 4 tanks of this mission coming in pairs. The first 2 are just a minor inconvenience, while the last 2 were decent at their jobs in helping the giant soldiers. There's no skin on the final tank though. There is one more mid-wave break 75% of the way through, but afterwards, there really isn't much, other than it's repetitive. But to my surprise, the final portion starts off with a ghostly Monoculus. This Monoculus is only used twice to start off the last 2 subwaves here, but this is the only mission that ever does this. After a while, the finale will send out the giant support that's been lingering on the wave bar for the past 17 minutes. A chief burst fire demo called Undying Colossus that, as its name implies, is unkillable, and explains why there isn't a boss health bar on the screen. This chief can't pick up the bomb, but will instead camp on it until some other bot picks it up or the timer runs out, meaning that it is quite possible to have them sit at certain spots and completely ignore them as you beat out the rest of the mission. The ending of this mission is definitely its weakest portion, but other than that, the rest of the mission plays out fairly decently. The mission also took on plenty of risks trying out new ideas, and while they haven't aged too well nowadays, I'll still give props where it's due. Some of the custom bots aren't the greatest, but I wouldn't say any of them were too frustrating to deal with. I'll give Corroding Cadavers a B. The next map is Power Plants, and this map is the only one in Canteen Crasher that features only one intermediate. This one is called Generator Gambit. The waves have some decent lineups to them, with most of the commons being the workhorse of the mission, although some of the ideas used prior will carry over to the later half of the mission. As far as pacing is concerned, it's pretty good. However, the mission does have its issues with the spawn times of giants. They do spawn far apart one another, such that it will drag out the wave far longer than it should. I would have said it happens sometimes, but this is a very persistent issue with every single wave. By far, the worst offenders are the giant scouts throughout. It is quite easy to kill these guys quick, which means you will unironically stand around and wait for the next one to spawn in before moving on over to the next subwave. The mission does have a few custom bots, but the majority of them are commons, and all of them have their appropriate icons, which is well and good. None of the heater heavy supports here can burn on hit either, so thank God for that. The final wave doesn't have much, but it starts with giant boxing heavies that move slightly faster than you'd expect, and a bunch of heal on hit robots. Its finale starts out with a light show, bringing out a chief pyro named Weaponized Pyrotechnics Expert, using an infinitely firing man-melter that deals half of the damage but can deal crit damage versus burning players. This mission does have a bit of a repetitive structure to it, and the giants weren't all too well paced together, but besides that, the intermediate's kind of alright. Gonna give Generator Gambit a C. Moving on over to the Quetzal now, this map has 2 intermediates this time and 1 advanced mission. The first intermediate is Sunset Sacrilege. The first wave of this mission only had common bots, but Jesus was it slow with the spawn times. You'll run into a lot of times where robots trickle in after another after dealing with the main bulk of these subwaves. The rest of the experience plays the exact same, and honestly the small and interesting details within this mission are few and far between. I'm honestly not sure why, but for some reason they made the giant heavy on wave 4 vaporize on kill. There is nothing else but the stat change to the giant. Cool, I guess? The final wave starts out with a chief charge soldier named Corporal Crits with a Z that is a burst fire and has a conch, both of which were not accounted for its icon. Other than that, the finale is pretty much standard stuff, before ending off with a giant battalion soldier squatted with large bowmen and crits medics. Just an intermediate to check off the list, I guess. Sunset Sacrilege earns a D. The second intermediate is Oaxaca Offense. This mission, much like the prior one, doesn't have too much going for it for the majority of the time, but for some bizarre reason, Wave 2's lineup of giants were intentionally designed to appear in reverse order. Here, it's giant Sandmans first, then it's regular giant soldiers, and then finally, the giant conch soldier. There's only a handful of custom bots that the mission uses, and after getting through them, their additions seem okay. The thing about the mission though is its finale. For some reason, it goes all out by only having sniper bots here, but despite how wacky wacky this idea of a finale is, this is still an intermediate, so everything is like super easy to kill. There was a Chief Rapid Fire Bowman at the end, which was named Chief Hunter, but they were also quick to deal with too. Interesting way to end off the mission, I guess, but all the stuff that happened before really didn't have much to it. Oaxaca Offense is D. The only advanced mission on this map is Tlacopan Tenacity. Much like the others, this mission doesn't have a lot of standout features. However, I would say this is definitely the best of the bunch. It does incorporate a select few custom bots throughout the mission, but the waves themselves are pretty well structured and have solid pacing. I do think there are a few parts where the next set of bots should have spawned a bit earlier. The moments where you have to destroy the tank, as well as the ending subways, are quite guilty of this, but it's not that bad in all honesty. The difficulty curve of this mission scales pretty well, and most waves were balanced, with the only hiccup being the heavies paired with crits medics on wave 4 that became pretty lethal with the map's long sightlines. The final wave started with crit pyros that were pocketed by Ubers, setting up for the finale where a trio of giant banner soldiers escorted a chief shotgun heavy named Major Boomstick. Good lord, what is that icon? Their shotgun was slightly weaker, but was rapid fire that got progressively faster as they get lower health. While this mission didn't have a lot in terms of what to see, it does offer a competent experience. One of the few good ones Canteen Crasher has within its catalog. Tlacopan Tenacity earns a B. Now, here's a maps mission that I'm sure 99% of us have never seen. Radar. It shares the same aesthetics as Upward, what with Red's base being up top a mountain, and the layout going upwards, whatever. But if I'm being honest, the map certainly isn't the prettiest to look at, and there are some details that are just really unpolished. But it would be far more important for me to talk about the features with this map. One of the things is that the bots that spawn from the carrier tanks get some slight speed boost. It's a strange design choice, considering the spawn points aren't exactly that far off from the drop-off point. But most notably, the map features airdrop spawn points. Bots can either drop in the middle of the first area or on the metal platforms above. Anytime the map uses airdropping robots, the map's air raid siren sounds, but it's pretty awful to listen to because the siren is constantly peaking its audio.
Oh fuck, Arian.
And why is it so loud? This map also features forward spawn points, but as far as playable missions are concerned, these have never been used. And these missions, oh boy, and I hate that I have to be saying this, but these two missions that we're going to cover do not provide a fun time with the map. The first is an intermediate named Recruits Recognition, and this mission uses the airdrop mechanic to an obnoxious degree. Most of the time, the mission uses airstrike soldiers that will rain down rockets, and while they may start off with a damage penalty, it will be removed down the line. It also doesn't help the fact that the mission is pretty relentless with their spawn rates. If you don't have someone watching over the area like an engineer, chances are you will be forced back up into the base. And if you are that person who decides to deal with the air support, you won't enjoy the mission when the bots are constantly being dealt with at their spawn, especially in certain points where the airdrop supports are basically infinite. Of course, the mission uses other kinds of airdropping robots, but the airstrike soldiers are definitely the worst because they can just deal damage for free and are overall just an unfair encounter. I wish I had more to talk specifically about the intermediate itself, but this mission brings forth the awfulness of the airdrop mechanic, and you would be blessed to play some of the waves that don't utilize it. There are a few other custom bots, some of which have their weapons swapped out for the most part, but there are giant fury pyros in the beginning that had their health boosted to 5,000. There is this fifth wave that, for some reason, designed their samurai demos and a few shotgun heavies to ignore the bomb and run towards the hatch instead. And the final wave really didn't have much aside from the weird parachuting medics. I honestly don't know why they decided to make these medics drop off on their own. Some people might call this mission decent, but I would definitely call this the most unfun intermediate to play through due to the frequent usage of the airdrops. And oftentimes it puts players at a disadvantage that makes the whole experience a frustrating one. Gonna give Recruits Recognition an F. The second mission of Radar is an advance called No, I can't, no, I don't want to cover Rapid Ravage. Alright, well, it was pretty much inevitable at this point, but respectively, this is the worst mission in Canteen Crasher. Rocky Ravage has a lot of things going wrong with it that I feel we need to go into full detail as to why this is. So this mission carries over the obnoxious airdrop mechanic, but then also utilizes custom robots intentionally designed to be more frustrating to deal with. Not even a wave in, and the mission super buffs existing bot templates for the worst. Two giant jumping Sandmans here have their health significantly boosted to 3,000 health that also moves at double the speed and with additional jump height. Now this is just an unbalanced template through and through. And don't forget that the double damage from the original template is also copied over. So we're dealing with giant super scouts that are also also armored and auto jumps every 5 seconds up really high. These guys are horrible to deal with without a soldier abusing Rocket Specialist. There's also a giant shotgun heavy at the end. Sure, it's not as offensive as those 2 scouts, but it almost has double the health and it has self-healing too, with the difficulty increase affecting the airdropping bots. Anytime the air raid siren sounds, you are now forced to fall back and get inside, because now you do not have the manpower to handle the bots coming from all directions. And while the intermediate at least gave the airstrike soldiers some damage penalty in the beginning, with Rocky Ravage you will not be seeing anything like that here. The second wave utilizes a whole bunch of hitscan pistol and SMG bots, all of which are expert skill, meaning they essentially have aimbot. They're also going to roll in plenty of giant banner soldiers, and their effects combined are going to make this wave extremely miserable for scout and pyro players. The 2 tanks here are relatively beefy and they'll split on both paths. You'll get the short end of the stick if you choose to deal with the one that's alone. The third wave has a bomb gate carried from the sky, and the carrier can get its bomb buff mid-air. It also has groups of pyros, some which are always fire and others that can reflect back. Plus there are the super speedy 3rd degree pyros named Destroyer of Medibeam. Sure? Then, this wave ends with a Chief Lock and Load demo that's pocketed by a giant crits medic, which for some reason also gets to have a boss health bar. The 4th wave for the most part only has a couple of bad bot designs like sticky bomb demos that lack the fixed animations, as well as the giant heater heavies that burns on hit, burns on hits. I love burns on hit, man. It's my favorite robot of Canteen Crasher. Other than that, I'd say it's the least worst wave to deal with. But as I say that, the next wave afterwards is the absolute worst. It starts with 2 giant anchor fan scouts with the mega heal effect, meaning that the only way to slow them down is to body block them dead in their tracks. And throughout the entire wave, the map constantly destroys the eardrums as the Mad Milk scouts spawn throughout, that just run around the map all the way to the hash and then come down towards you while at the same time spamming out their milk jars. And then there's also holiday punch heavies that do the same thing. What was the wave trying to do here? To force you to turn around and deal with the bots? Because 99% of the time, they're functionally useless, when their tools were hardly ever taken advantage of by the other bots. There's one Chief Heal on Kill Deflector here, fairly standard, but they do come with groups of Brass Beast Heavies and a plethora of crit boosted Demo Knights. But these bots are not what makes this wave the absolute worst. It's the second Chief appearing at the very end, which is a Quickie Bomb demo that spams the entire area with stickies non-stop. This Chief is not only unbalanced, but also forces Pyros and Spies to use Uber Canteens to effectively deal with them, and it does obscene amounts of damage. Obviously, this Quickie demo can be countered by just using a shield medic and be done with, but you should never be forced to use a medic to counter anything, especially with a team that knows what they're doing. At that point, you really have to question how a mission like this ever managed to get past the judges. We didn't have one here, so instead I just cheesed it with Rocket Specialist to hold it to a standstill so that we can finally kill this thing. And yes, I call it cheesing because this is what happens if you just needed one pass to get into the campaign. And of course, in Canteen Crasher fashion, gotta finish off the stragglers that take too long to spawn in before moving on. The 6th wave is much better than the prior wave, though that's not necessarily a huge compliment. For the most part, it spams Vaccinator medics pairing up with a bunch of commons, including the steel gauntlets that also come with the final tank. This wave also airdrops support powers with backburners on the metal platform, intentionally designed to walk towards the hatch and surprise players from behind. Backline Backburn Abomination are what these guys are called. At the end of the wave is a giant duo similar to wave 3, but with the Dragon Fury and the shield medic. Both of them have a boss health bar, but the medic's health isn't buffed all that much, and the pyro only had 8,000 health to shoot down. The 7th wave, as you would expect, would have the final chief to beat. First, you deal with bong scouts and blast soldiers that mostly serve to stall for time. After a while, you'll finally face a chief that comes with parachuting soldiers that all spam the entire battlefield before dying with negative health regen. The chief is a burst fire barrage soldier named the Deputy Airstrike Commander, and it also came with 3 giant Vaccinator medics, except this time the mission now decided to boost each medic's health to 8,000. This chief isn't as bad as the Chief Quickie demo, but they can still effectively one-shot you with its burst fire, and it does auto-jump super high every 15 seconds, making it an annoying fight all around. The Vaccinator medics will also jump with them as well. I'm well aware that my criticism's been too harsh on the mission, but damn, I've never played a mission that was dead set on sabotaging the very map it was made for. Rocky Ravage is an absolute disaster of a mission, with so many awful and questionable design decisions that it should have been striked from the campaign. This seriously needed a major overhaul across its many waves to even remotely make it decent. The mission also overuses the airdrop mechanic so much without realizing how atrocious it is to hear the air raid siren every 15 seconds. Almost like the mission wanted you to walk walk away with tinnitus by the end of it all. That and the fact that the gameplay was also ruined by the bots, what with the bad custom bot designs and superficial changes made for the worse. Playing on a map with a poorly designed layout and gimmick is already bad enough, but having a mission that convinces you to never play on the same map ever again? Now that's something. I'm giving Rocky Ravage a rating of E, because there's no other mission in Canteen Crasher that performs on the same level as this one. Alright, the next map on the list is Sequoia. Just like with Area 52, this map features 4 advanced missions in Canteen Crasher, the first of which is Arboreal Assault. This mission has a lot of custom bots, many of which have arbitrary buffs for the worse. The way they design gate bots is quite frustrating, the notorious examples being shotgun heavies with faster move speed on Wave 1, and Wave 5 having these armored pistol scouts with both damage resist and a health boost, without having them scale up in size at all. In regards to the pacing, it remains somewhat decent, but does get sluggish in ending the waves out. Often it's due to the high number of giants that trickle in after another. There are a few weirdly designed bots, one of which is a crits medic that doesn't crit boost until they get to low health. There's also a giant landmine layer demo on Wave 2. This one uses sticky bomb icon, but the demo here uses a standard grenade launcher and its stickies were just a replacement over the pipe grenades. They're fine for what they are, but yeah, it's definitely an archaic design. When you get to the final wave, you'll deal with a lot of mini giant pyros and demo knights here that the mission also refers to as jumbo bots. There's a couple of giant demos and mangler soldiers, and the mission will finish off with a chief heavy supported by 3 giant vaccinator medics. How original. And the heavy's name is Wildfire, a heater heavy that can heal on kill and burn players on hit.
Sheen, this is the 7th week in a row you've shown
burning heater heavy
in class.
The mission played fine in the end, but I wasn't quite fond of the variety of custom bots used, some of which did fall into the bad side of things. Arboreal Assault is C. Next up is Double Trouble. This mission is labeled as an advanced, yet the pacing here is as slow as the many intermediates of Canteen Crasher. It's really slow, and the whole area just feels hollow a majority of the time. There's a few custom bots here and there, though the one that's frequently used is a giant nuke demo that pretty much one-shotted players. Very annoyingly though, the mission will sometimes stack 3 shield medics on top of a singular giant, essentially making a giant shield bubble. This only ever happens like 2 times in the mission, but it is still quite overkill. There were a couple of main gate bots on the first half, but most of them were used for one subwave, basically a blink and you'll miss it kind of deal. A Sergeant Crits with a Z was used as a gate bot for wave 4. It behaved like the Broken Parts variant, but with reduced health and a slightly longer reload time. The only time that a wave had something befitting of the mission's title was the ending of wave 5, where a Chief Nuiced a lot and a Chief Burst Conch Soldier came out at the same time together. The 6th and final wave didn't have much going on, though there was an instance of icon stacking, where there were giant rapid fire direct hit soldiers first, and then later a giant burst fire direct hit soldier that actually fit the icon it was intended for. At one point, there was a chief sniper named Master Musket that came with pyros and a shield medic, but for my section in particular, they were shredded in 5 seconds. Apparently, they are able to utilize explosive headshot against players. The final chief of the mission appears at the end, and his name Sir Spams a lot. They are essentially a roided up burst fire demo that shot more pipes. All things considered, the bots here are fine for what they are, but it's mainly the pacing of the whole mission that drags the experience down. Gonna give Double Trouble a D. Next up, we have Fiber Ops. What I noticed about this mission throughout is the constant use of commons spawning in massive groups at a time. The only times where it deviates away from this is whenever the bots come out one at a time with a medic, but these moments are few and far between. As for a majority of the waves, they all have a fairly standard lineup of bots, though at this point, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But what you will frequently deal with is that every wave ends very slowly. 3 of them are due to the tanks that will soak up a lot of damage such that the only thing left standing at the end will be those very tanks. This mission will also often spawn very annoying variants of scouts. At first, they spawn hordes of Criticola scouts, ranging from bats to scatterguns, which isn't too bad. But on wave 3, you have to deal with jumping Sandmans. For some ungodly reason, they gave these scouts 650 health to whittle down, as well as extra move speed. The subwave doesn't last that long, but boy was it nothing but pure annoyance. The second worst subwave will be on wave 6. Here is where you'll deal with fast bonk scouts that also share the same boosted stats as before. I think we're overdoing this trope just a little bit. This mission utilizes 2 chiefs at most. You'll see one on wave 5 where it's just a chief blast soldier reused as a gate bot. Luckily, the second chief is much more special, as it appears in the beginning of the final wave named Chief Rocket Spammer. They are a rapid fire soldier that shot faster the less health it had, and yep, that's it. Afterwards, the mission will send a train line of giant black boxes to try and capture the gate. Then comes a whole subway full of crit boosted heavies pocketed by Uber medics. Then at the finale is an endless horde of demo and pyro supports, along with 5 giant heater deflector heavies that need to be killed in order to beat the mission. Hold on, what? What are you asking me? Oh no. Yeah, they don't set you on fire. Yep, thank goodness for that. All things considered, it's an alright mission. Gonna give Fiber Ops a C. The last of the advanced missions here is Uproot Upgrade. This mission compared to the others does have some decent pacing. However, some parts of it does slow down where you're just waiting for the next group to spawn in. There's not that many robots that I would consider annoying to fight against, but this mission likes to use shield medics, both common and giants, for every odd numbered wave and the 6th wave. There is one wave where the only main robots to destroy are giants. As you may guess, running a spy here does ruin the pacing for everyone, but the wave does manage to pick itself up when it brings out giant burst fire soldiers along with the regen medic. As somewhat generic as the mission is, relatively speaking, there is one specific detail to remember about this mission, and it's that it has a recurring chief robot that appears not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 times across all waves. It is a chief soldier named Captain Quadfire that will first appear on the first ever subwave, and it shoots 4 rockets in an instant burst at a time, hence the name Quadfire, though I'm not sure why it appears 5 times instead of 4, but whatever. As per the mission's title, they will get some small upgrades over time, like how on wave 3 he has his health increase from before. Then on wave 5, after a giant black box and shield medic, they will have the rocket launcher fire the rockets faster and reload faster too. Then on wave 6, they get the health boosted once again, but also gets the rocket launcher crit boosted too. And then finally, on the final wave, they will come out with a giant shield medic, and the rocket launcher now functions similar to a rapid fire. This idea of recurring boss isn't bad, but it can definitely get old. Not to mention that for the most part, every encounter for them is kind of just the exact same, except at the very end. So it would have been better if this guy appeared less often, but also condensed some of its upgrades together to make the fights more unique. But still, it's a commendable idea that someone probably won't steal for the next campaign event. As far as the whole mission is concerned, I still think this remains as one of the better ones Canteen Crasher has, owing to its relatively decent pacing and a well enough experience all around. Uproot Upgrade. Uproot Upgrade deserves a B. Jesus, try and say that title 3 times as fast. Next on up, we have Shiver Peak. This map features 1 intermediate and 2 advanced missions. Starting off with Coldfront Coalition first. Much like all the other intermediates, this one suffers from bad pacing. Man, I feel like a broken record by this point. The mission has a couple of weird moments to talk about, like where the 3rd wave had 2 tanks and 128 bottle icons. By killing the first demo that comes out, you summon a stampeding horde of bottle knights. I mean, I guess this whole wave seemed cute for its time, but the wave does get stale within the first minute and a half into it, and the tanks didn't really do much to help break the sense of monotony. There's also the 6th wave, which is pretty much just the same idea as Hamlet Hostility. The thing that makes this wave bad though is, again, the pacing. Though the first tank spawned sooner than the original iteration, the rest of the tanks spawned twice as far apart from one another. The final wave honestly doesn't have much. It's structured much like a typical early game advanced wave. Other than the 2 waves that were talked about, not much going on for this mission. Coldfront Coalition earns a D. The first advanced mission here is Smissmas Slay. This is a titanium tank mission that was resubmitted for Canteen Crasher. It held 17th place with an overall score of 70. Something also worth noting is that this mission was on a completely different map before being ported over to Shiver Peak. This mission starts out pretty well, with Demo Knights and Pyros that are simple enough to take down, and the giant Pyro ending it off with a giant crit streak following behind wasn't too bad at all. Good news, right? Well, the second wave is what hits you like a truck. It's completely ruined by the swarms of heavies combining with steel gauntlets and giant bear heavies. While these minigun heavies are only normal AI, they can still track you pretty easily. This wave turns into a disaster if you can't handle the heavies, especially considering that they come with conch soldier supports. Another bad issue is that for some unknown reason, the giant bear heavies have the ability to fully heal on kill, even though their icon never says that they do. So if you do get pushed to the hash by this point, you're even more screwed. Wave 3 is decent, though not much really happens here except for having crit boosted lock and load demos. The next wave, however, is full of soldiers, including banners and crit boosted direct hits. This one gets pretty stale though, since the things that you shoot at in the beginning are what you shoot at by the end. Then there's wave 5. It has a lot of shield medics, but the other bots for the most part are your usual fluff. However, this has the most unfairly designed subwave. At the end of the wave, it spawns the Chief Santa Heavy with a Chief Shield Medic. The medic's name is Number 1 Elf, and the Heavy's name is Servo Claws. They use a Hulong heater that doesn't burn players on hit, but, and I mean a huge but, is instead able to secretly deal crit damage against burning players. The subwave also sends out Scorch Shot Pyros that can quite easily set you on fire, and small-sized Bat Scouts that run towards the hash and flank around. But for some unknown reason, they purposefully designed these support bots so that they cannot fill up your your rage meter. Why? This is completely unnecessary. If the mission is sending support bots with a boss, I should be rewarded for spending some time dealing with the supports. This is nonsensical and unfair. And I also don't understand why this mission is purposefully obscuring the Chief Heavy's trait. They should have been just fully crit boosted instead, since they basically were in the beginning of the subwave anyways. The last wave of this mission has its entire wave bar loaded with its massive lineup, but the bots here aren't much to speak of. And there is a reason why. It's because there's a total of 8 giants in the wave, and their names are all a reference to a poem called A Visit from St. Nicholas, where it describes Santa's sleigh being pulled by a team of 8 reindeers with their respective names. While this mission did have decent pacing and a good enough start, the rest of it is badly designed, down to a few occasions where it's just being unfair because the mission wanted to be challenging. I'm gonna give Smissmas Slay an F. The second advanced mission to wrap this up is Icebreaker. This mission has a pretty generic start, though it can push hard, especially with the burst fire demos and steel gauntlets appearing later. The second wave is where you start to see the mission become challenging, but in an irritating way. There's a variety of custom bots with stats you never expect out of them. Robots like Scatterblast Scouts that move oddly slow, but uses a force of nature that deals an absurd 145% more damage in one shot. There's giant bomber demos in wave 3 firing grenades with very short fuse times, meaning you'll be caught dead within a certain range. We've seen Beggar's Bazooka soldiers in the past that fire in bursts for the most part, but this giant bazooka soldier at the end of wave 3 was able to quote-unquote tap fire its shots. The fourth wave likes to clutter the screen with health bars. There's tanks spawning one at a time, but there's also giant heal-on-kill heavies with slightly more health. The screen will also occasionally be cluttered by a squishy support demo that was basically a tiny Nuxalot. This mission had a few more custom heavies like giant brass beasts, but it also likes to use these suppressor heavies that use the Natasha slowing down players. Not to mention that these guys are on high skill and have a little extra accuracy. The fifth wave didn't offer much besides them, but it did have 2 tanks that move way slower than you would expect. The sixth wave clutters the screen again, this time using giant heal-on-kill burst fire soldiers. It then proceeded to have a stream of battalion soldiers as well as 2 giant trios of a variety of soldiers, before ending the wave off with a weird announcer voice line followed by a chief soldier named Sergeant Shiverpeak. They function as a cross between a burst fire and a barrage soldier while using an Australian rocket launcher. Those giant bomber demos from before come back on the start of the final wave, this time as Boo's Boomers. They're armored up with 8,000 health this time and deal way more damage than before. Other than that, the second third of it doesn't have too much going on, aside from shooting a couple of bots you're already familiar with. The final subwave is where you'll fight a Chief Pyro with 3 giant vaccinators slapped on top of them. The Pyro is named Prometheus, and it's got a flamethrower with its damage and afterburn boosted significantly. It also has a powerful air blast and a pretty long flame range to boot. Didn't stop us from taking it down easily thanks to our medic and Mad Milk, but with all the damage and air blast coming in, I suppose that was the intended experience. While the custom bots on display are more or less commendable for being more than a slightly adjusted vanilla template, the added challenge did come with quite a bit of frustration. This game did get carried by a heavy and medic that didn't sugarcoat it for sure, and I can definitely imagine the whole experience suffering immensely without those two combined. Regardless, the whole mission was a slog, and I can prove it by showing how long this mission actually took for us to finish. I'm gonna give Icebreaker a D. The next map on the list is Skull Cove. This only hosts one advanced mission and it's nightmare themed. This one is called Hell Overdrive and it's a 1-wave endurance. It starts out better than 1 down where the difficulty actually matches the high starting currency. But with that being said, it's another one of the more difficult missions Canteen Crasher has to offer. And yes, you will encounter robots with artificial stat buffs. In terms of gameplay, it mostly relies on stacking a lot of giants together and dishing out a lot of spam to push forward. And of course around the midpoint, there is a chief that spawns with 3 giant vaccinator medics. This time, the chief is a soldier that is literally called Angry Jesus, and it rapidly fires crit boosted rockets, but without a target to shoot at, they can reload up to 8 rockets oddly enough. Later in the mission, you will start to encounter a lot more giants. Some subwaves will spawn one after another, while others let them stack on top of each other, making Spy miserable to play at times while simultaneously making classes like an explosive headshot sniper or beggar soldier thrive here. Of course, there are the typical subwaves that have a lot of commons with a few giants, although some will just have robots of the same types that do get a little repetitive. When you get somewhere around the last quarter of the mission, it'll spawn as last 4 tanks split on both sides connecting together. We didn't need a pyro for this one thankfully, but right after this, the pacing takes a complete nosedive when it tries to spawn everything at once. Massive clusters of crit boosted heavies and soldiers separately for 4 waves straight, until the pacing picks itself back up again. The second to last subwave will consist of buffed up giants stacking together for 3 squads straight. Then you'll face off the second chief of the mission, which is another soldier named named Zombie Leader. This one is just a burstfire black box soldier with a conjurer that, with both combined, lets him heal by a substantial amount. Good thing we brought a shield medic, I guess. But as much as I would like to try this without them and a sniper that completely carried this mission, I wouldn't go out of my way to replay this one. The constant spam and the overuse of giants that frequently stack together makes this mission quite a slog to get through. Because of that, it also tends to be repetitive and gets stale. Hell Overdrive deserves a D. The next map on the list is Snowpine. The map debuted here as a map submission, but doesn't see much use elsewhere, which is disappointing. Though from what I hear, it's because the sniper bots are extremely oppressive here, where they are able to shoot and see through the plethora of trees. Regardless, this map just has one intermediate and one advanced mission to cover. The intermediate here is called Alpine Assault. This map has 2 spawn points out in front, and the mission uses both of them immediately on the first ever subwave. Now, you would have told me that I should have seen the ambushing pyros and medics coming, but the problem was that before this, the map's hologram essentially baits you into camping towards the right spawn point. I've already learned my lesson, so I was constantly on the lookout for the left spawn point. Little did I realize that the mission only ever uses it for a total of 3 subwaves. The second time it was used was for wave 4, where it had Tomislav heavies appearing on both sides that could easily turn the entire team into Swiss cheese. The third time it was used was wave 5 for a chief soldier named Duke Nukem. This one fired explosive nukes off like a charged soldier. Besides those 3 inconveniences, the intermediates progressively get strange in terms of wave design. Towards the midpoint, you'll start to see a lot of common bots that are in exceedingly low counts. The mission does proceed back to normal after the fact, though they enjoyed crit boosting their scouts later on. The final wave didn't have much. A few giants were used, but they were gone in the blink of an eye. Aside from the 3 charged soldiers back to back that were used at the very end. It's an alright intermediate, but it wasn't all that interesting despite the weird quirks. I'm gonna give Alpine Assault a D. The advanced mission here is Permafrost Panic, and immediately it decides to be annoying, with its use of steel gauntlets alongside Milk and Jarate supports on the first wave. There will also be pyros that have a very small chance to air blast back at you. This mission doesn't have a lot going on in terms of custom bots, but what it does have is a lot of hit scan robots like heavies and scattergun scouts on high skill level, which at some points it becomes hit scan hell. The tanks used here were kind of on the beefier side, though I honestly think our team's damage wasn't too well optimized here. One of the more frustrating aspects of this mission though is the constant appearance of sniper support starting from wave 2 onwards. I've already mentioned it before, but this map has gigantic sightlines, so much so that you really want to have a teammate on constant guard for them. The mission only has a couple of waves that start in an annoying fashion, like blast soldiers to open up wave 3, and the fury pyros that were pocketed by shield medics for wave 4. The 6th and final wave has you dealing with 4 tanks and a bunch of crit boosted scouts and bowmen. There's a few giants that are also crit boosted, like a deflector heavy and some super scouts, but the difficulty dips as soon as you get to the 6th rapid fire soldiers later. There is a chief that appears at the end though. It is a pyro named the Permafrost Pyro, that as his icon implies, slow down players on hit. Though if you're playing a mid to long range class, this chief kinda just becomes a complete joke. I guess that's why the final tank had a spawn alongside it to split players away, but it didn't really change how boring the finale is. For the most part, the mission is pretty basic with waves that have some irritating ways to start them off. It's far from the worst though, and definitely remains tolerable at the end of the day, so long as you keep the snipers away from ruining the experience. Permafrost Panic is C. The next map we have is Space Post. There are 3 advanced missions here, and no intermediates. The first advanced mission is Regolith Rampage. This is a titanium tank mission that had been resubmitted for Canteen Crasher. It held 8th place with an overall score of 80. This mission has somewhat of a decent start. It's kinda boring where the groups of heavies can be spawn camped easily, but the rest of the comments along with giant conch soldiers trickling in did bring it up a little. In terms of difficulty, this mission does offer one of the more challenging experiences, mostly thanks to the custom bots that appear later into it, such as my good old buddies the cow mangler soldiers that burn on hit. Woo! Another issue that's going to persist throughout are the snipers that constantly spawn across 5 of its waves. They aren't a problem to deal with on their own, but they will upgrade over time, where they'll become Machina snipers that... oh, for God's sake! Onwards though, I don't really have much to complain about the difficulty. Even though it's harsh to the point where we got pushed a couple of times, I wouldn't say it was poorly balanced or anything, just okay. But with that being said, there's plenty of moments throughout where the mission drags on far longer than it should. The only time the mission decides to go hard and crit boosted boss was on wave 5, but the wave itself overall was fine. Though this playthrough was done with a medic, so take that with a grain of salt. The final wave really didn't have much going for it, just a few giant deflectors that have plenty of medics with them, and big rock burst fires pocketed by giant regen medics one after another. At the end, the mission utilizes a unique aspect of this map being the wormhole that opens out in the front, which we'll be seeing more of as we play through the map. The wormhole is used as a spawn point, and the mission uses it to drop down a chief heavy named the Iron Gibbous, apparently related to the Iron Gibbous Mark II from Midnight Mutiny. This one, compared to the Mark Mark II has much higher health and can heal on kill by a fair amount. Wait, you're telling me that the first version is more superior to the second version? This mission has some decent aspects to it, but it does have a few frustrating custom bots to deal with. The pacing can also be bad at times, but it's an alright mission for what it is. Regolith Rampage is C. Next up is Symphony of Space Machines, another former Titanium tank mission that previously held 11th place with an overall score of 77. And the first bot of the mission is a telltale sign that the mission consists of custom bots 99% of the time. Like the mission before, it reintroduces Mangler soldiers that burn players. Oh, and of course there's a sniper that... Man, did people really unironically enjoy fighting these types of bots back then? If there's anything to go by, it's that this mission brings plenty of custom bots with annoying crowd control mechanics. Stuff like giant loose cannon demos with obscene knockback, and soldiers that stun with rocket specialists on wave 2. This wave in particular is pretty egregious, where its final subwave stalls out with nothing but said soldiers. The way the custom bots are introduced halfway into the mission have had their frustration levels dialed up. There's going to be pyros that knock you backwards with their flames, and their effects are quite noticeable. Then later on, it'll introduce giant heavies paired with these giant armored medics, the first of which has an ubercharge that can last up to 16 seconds when it's used, and the second is just a spongy or quick fix poppable medic, though this second medic came with a giant magnetic heavy that was able to pull you down to the ground on hit. The sixth wave admittedly doesn't have much going on, though there is a giant ray gun heavy that fires pumps and projectiles, which will become relevant later. On the seventh and final wave, you shoot down the final tank while getting through the giant battalion and conch soldiers that were all pocketed by giant medics. One of the medics got stuck on his pathing at their spawn, so it made this first subwave a lot quicker to deal with. Not long after the giants, a wormhole opens up to drop down the last chief of the mission, a heavy named Lord Laser that functions exactly as the ray gun heavies from before, the only difference being that it was crit boosted for the most part. This mission could have been okay-ish if it weren't for the constant usage of robots with knockback or stun effects. The pacing was also quite slow with this one, at least from my own experience. Symphony of Space Machines is D. The last of the 3 advanced missions is Dead Space. Initially, the mission starts off rather repetitive. It immediately starts with 6 Super Scouts appearing periodically for the first subwave. Like with the 2 other missions, this one also has Cowmanglers that deal burn on hits. There are also snipers, but they're different. An armored sniper using a Machina sporting some extra charge rate and reload speed. Dude, I really don't know what is it with this map that these missions suddenly wanted to design the worst sniper templates possible. Though this mission has another obnoxious support, and it's their sentry busters that were decorated with a ginormous pumpkin head that obscures part of the battlefield, for no other particular reason other than to look funny. Over the course of the mission, it will continue to become repetitive with the way each subwave plays out. The majority of them feature a handful of common bot types followed by single types of giants that can stack into large groups. Towards the midpoint, there is a challenging section where there's 3 tanks along with plenty of giant heavies pocketed by mega heal medics one after another. There's also a few bear heavies that are just mainly fodder, but the giant heavies are definitely the toughest to deal with. There are a handful of times where the subwaves attempts to be weird, like having massive groups of blue tugger medics at a time, as well as these gremlin pumpkin demos with their one-shotting capers. Around the last quarter of the wave, the wormhole appears for the third and final time of this playthrough that has nothing spawning in it yet because you have to kill off the last remaining pirate demos. There is a long pause before the mission spawns the final tank, and out the wormhole comes out a giant pair of Fanowar scouts along with a chief named Star Sentinel, a soldier firing a shotgun slowly like a sniper rifle dealing huge chunks of damage. However, the main flaw of this subwave is that if you happen to be extremely lucky and have the bomb reset after they spawn in, the boss will just stand there in the middle of the front shooting players. There's no bomb runner supports either, so the subwave can just be an easy win. After that though, the final subwave didn't have much to look forward to. Just plenty of pyros, scouts, and pumpkins to kill. And it would have ended here, until the wormhole spawns the hidden chief of this mission. A steel gauntlet heavy with the most obvious icon and appearance ever, aptly named Bootleg Thanos. This chief attacks very slowly, and guess what? It burns players on hit, on top of making them bleed and marking them for death. It's honestly a pretty amusing gag boss, I have to say. You can definitely tell it's made for its time, and yeah. While I do have issues about its repetitiveness, there are a few areas of the mission that I've enjoyed playing through. It also provided a decently paced experience and some good fun without overstepping its custom bot usage. One of the few good missions of Canteen Crasher, I'd say. Dead Space will be receiving an A from me. Let's move on over to Steep. This map has one intermediate and one advanced mission to cover. Cliffside Clashing is the intermediate of this map. The one word that perfectly describes this mission is that it's repetitive. You're always fighting groups of commons, dealing with tanks every odd-numbered wave, and facing against giants that alternate between having some support and other times none at all. Even the payout every wave is always 600 in total. The one other standout feature is that by wave 5, the announcer warns about groups of teleport engineers spawning from the front, but if you have been spawn camping the mission like us, it falls flat. The final wave has you facing against a chief soldier that is essentially a kid-friendly version of Sergeant Crits, named Sergeant Mini Crits. Other than a handful of number tweaks, the soldier's crits are replaced with the buff banner effects and their explosion effects copied over from the rocket jumper. And not much with this intermediate, let's just move on. Cliffside Clashing is F. The advanced mission of Steep is Mountainous Malware. This is a former Titanium tank mission that previously held 6th place, with an overall score of 82. The reason why it was not considered as a potential winner was because a different mission performed better than this one, and I believe their policy states that a map can only feature one mission for the tour. The one thing about this mission is that it frequently deploys giant scouts every wave. It does try to change up their variants whenever they're featured, but it did eventually become tedious having to deal with them every wave. The first wave has a bit of an issue where it's harder than the rest of the waves afterwards, mostly due to the giant shotgun heavies with Ubers appearing towards the end. The mission has custom bots, but they're quite gimmicky. One of them includes what are called suction pyros, which have an extremely long range and pulls you towards them with their burn damage. The first half of the mission plays decent, but the second half ended up just being underwhelming. The ending subways here were noticeably weaker than I anticipated and did not have much going for them. Like where wave 4 had this giant battalion soldier with a giant medic that both died earlier, and as a result it only had blast soldiers with shield medics to close it off. Just a bad ending all around. Then wave 5 had these giant heavies and a few crit downs and battalion soldiers on its second half, only to end it off with a final tank that was just really boring to shoot at because all the supports lagged far behind it, meaning they couldn't do much to push forward. This mission weirdly takes the same idea as Oaxaca Offense, where its final wave was an all-sniper wave, although it's better executed here because the finale was at least challenging. The mission will close off with a chief bowman named Lord of the Underbrush that can bleed players, but oddly enough, this boss's name has a 50-50 dice roll where the sniper could also be named King of Brizzy. Interesting idea, I guess. The mission has repetitive aspects to it, and a second half where the waves struggle to end off on a high note, as well as a small handful of custom bots that were annoying to deal with, but all things considered, it's a decent mission. Mountainous Malware is C. Next on up, we have Tie-In. Now this is one of the more notorious maps Community MvM has, mostly because the map's layout is extremely long and relatively linear for the most part. Though as far as missions are concerned, there is only one advanced mission here, and this mission is called Onsen Onslaught. It starts off very strange, where it's just 48 soldiers to kill and a variety of support medics. It's not a bad idea on paper, but the way it's executed is pretty awkward in practice, and overall it's just a drag. It's no surprise, since many faults of the gameplay can be blamed on the map itself. The mission does feature teleport engineers, but they're only on 4 of the 6 waves here. But while this map doesn't have its boss flank around the map, it is quite possible for these engineers to do so. Even when you do hold the mission in the front, the engineers will constantly teleport behind at this ramen shop. This mission really wants you to have someone keep them in check, but at the same time, the gameplay and pacing suffers for it, as you'll just have to run along the path just to find more robots to shoot at. Wave 2 is where the mission starts playing normally, but there's quite a bit of armored scouts that are way too tanky for their own good. Get pushed here though, and the wave will end pretty badly. Plenty of heavy supports with mixed skill levels, and 5 Fan of War scouts back to back that can still take forever to run through the map. The third wave just has a subway full of crit bowmen that turns this into a cover-based shooter. That wave will also bring out a giant heavy with a giant's crit screen, though the meta can be separated due to their slow speed. Not much happens afterwards, but those samurai demo icons will actually represent the samurai soldiers that are able to conch boost their allies. Wave 4 I would say is the worst one as a whole. It may start off fine with giant demos, but the supports are just a constant spawn of punch heavies. There's many giant cleaver scouts along with 8 crit boosted heavies that are all pocketed by 2 uber medics each. The massively long sidelines make this one really tough to get through, and then towards the end are a bunch of giant soldier medic duos back to back. Much like Wave 2, this one drags out and can quite easily get stale. Wave 5 doesn't have a lot going for it, aside from the small charged soldier spam for 1/3 of it, but towards the end, it will have this massively long wait time after the second tank and the last Last Samurai demo, before spawning in the last tank of the wave being the iconic Sentry tank of Taiyan. As threatening as it was, someone was able to get behind the tank close enough to where all of the sentries were targeting them without that person ever taking damage at all. So it got destroyed quick enough that the last of the 3 Super Scouts here lagged far behind to make for a sluggish ending. That's as close to a chief as you can get with this mission, because surprise, the final wave doesn't have much to write home about. Although, when you get to the finale, it is nothing but 2 tanks and 10 crit boosted Colonel Barrages stacking back to back, making this one of, if not the loudest ending to a mission in Canteen Crasher.
Jesus fucking Christ.
It has an ambitious first wave that didn't age too well, and some of the waves here didn't have a particularly great structure, but everything else with the mission mainly suffers from the bad pacing and staleness that is large in part due to the map's design. And consequently, this is among the longest missions to suffer through, at 30 minutes a beat when I play through this. Onsen Onslaught is F. The next map on the list is Train Yard. This is a map submission, and is also among the maps that have never really been used beyond its inception. But as we'll get into the intermediate and advanced here, we are going to be seeing why that is. This intermediate's name is Driving Training, and as usual, this intermediate doesn't have a lot going on thanks to the bad pacing. There are a few custom robots that appear, but nothing too far out there. The only chief in this mission appears on wave 4, which has an abomination of an icon. It's a Battalion's Burst Fire Heal on Hit Blast Soldier named Battalion's Blasting Commander with only about 15,000 health, and it's dead by the time I read out the sentence. If there's anything to take away from this intermediate though, it's that it highlights the bad issues with the first area of the map. Yes, the front is basically just a pint-sized Manhattan, and there's also the upper right spawn point where the Demo Knights can also charge down towards you, and anytime the mission ever sends out Gate Boss, the map's steam horn blares very loudly. But on top of that, holding the gates on this map is far worse than you can imagine. Any Gate Boss that spawn from the upper right will path towards the roof and drop down into the gates, which are apparently the flat cars of the park's trains. This map also decided to make gate holding even more complicated by tacking on 4 possible gates that go through the same route. Anyway, I'm saying all this because there isn't much to write about the final wave, just a couple of giants that die on their own without backup for the most part. And the mission ends with the final tank followed by a crit boosted Colonel Barrage pocketed by a single Uber Medic. This intermediate, much like the rest, really didn't have much going for it, especially with its slow pacing. Driving Training is F. The advanced mission of Train Yard is called Railroad Rabbit. But much like the intermediate, this one also suffers from bad pacing. It really likes to waste a lot of time spawning small groups of robots at very long intervals. This really isn't against the mission or anything, but I also want to mention one last thing about the map itself. The second half of the map is weirdly designed. After this very tight hallway, you've got multiple branching paths that split from the upper and lower levels. So unlike the many other maps, you can't exactly predict on the spot where the boss would go unless you study the layout beforehand. You can already imagine that I'm talking about this now because the Super Scout ran through the entire lower level of the map and was freely able to deploy the bomb. Talk about a perfect segue, am I right? With the lower wave count this mission has at 4, it does have mid-wave breaks, however they're only ever used for waves 1 and 2. The only problem here is that you still have to go out of your way to kill the engineers that have the sentry and teleporter set up, but whatever. Also hilariously, you can be cock-blocked by the gates closing themselves whenever the breaks happen. The mission doesn't have too much going for it, but it does suffer from gate boss being super annoying to deal with. Then again, this is more of a map issue than anything else. But with that said, this mission does try to go out of its way to utilize all of the 4 train gates, meaning that every wave bar will be extremely bloated by these 4 letters. But that also means up to 4 possible gates will be open, which is quite insufferable to deal with, might I add. The only chief with a unique name to encounter in this mission is at the end of wave 3, a chief soldier named Lieutenant Knockback that is a charged blast soldier with a battalion slapped on. Another bit of trivia to know is that his rockets can also deal bleed damage for 1 second. The final wave, much like the others, isn't all that interesting. There's a handful of custom bots, like a couple of flare barrage pyros. The only bizarre one here are some mini giant pyros that spray their flamethrower wildly around themselves. The finale ends off with a final tank again, but with some giant vanilla heater heavies. But you'll kill them faster than the last couple of banner soldiers and pyros grouped up together. It may not be among the longest missions to complete, but boy was a real slog to play through. All thanks to the slow pacing and holding off against the gate bots with its badly designed layout. Railroad Ravage is D. Among the last 4 maps Canteen Crasher has, we have Underground. This map does feature 4 missions, one of which is an intermediate and the other 3 are advanced. The single intermediate here is Mining Machines. There's not a lot with this one in all honesty. I suppose the one unique thing about it is having a few robots that somewhat relate to the mission's title. The mission supports like the snipers and spies have all got their names changed, but the main attraction are the Equalizer soldiers, both small and giant, that I suppose are the machines that mine. There are 2 chiefs along the way, but the mission doesn't really give them unique names. Matter of fact, they're both labeled as giants despite their massive health pools. One was just an earthquake soldier functioning similar to a rocket rain soldier, and the other a giant blasting demoman that shot a barrage of pipes with very low projectile speed. Like all other intermediates, it is a boring one to sit through. The mission will end with a chief heavy by the name of Project Planet Cracker that utilizes a brass beast that spams a lot of rockets. They will also come with buff banner support that don't spawn too often. I can appreciate the few details that makes this intermediate stand out a little bit, but it still plays much like the rest of them. Mining Machines is D. The first of the 3 advanced missions is Ultra Uplink. This is a former Titanium tank mission that had previously made it to 12th place, with an overall score of 75. This is also, as far as I'm aware, the last of such missions to be accepted into Canteen Crasher. This is the only mission in the whole operation where you start with $0, but consequently, the first wave is pretty easy. There are many giant heavies here, but they're all fairly balanced in a weird way where the ones after the first one are all at a low skill level, which also includes the crit boosted heavy. There is a challenge towards the end where it's a single giant black box to deal with, but there is plenty of money given up to this point so you could buy upgrades to make it easier. There's only a handful of times where the pacing can be rather sluggish, but I can only really name 2 instances where this is the case. The ending of Wave 2 is pretty slow, with its demos and crits medics spawning rather sparsely. Wave 3's beginning of Dragon Furies and Shield medics kind of does the same thing, but it does pick up as soon as the giant charging shield demos show up with their pretty high bash damage. For the most part, the pacing can be quite fast in many areas where the robots can cycle through quickly, but the mission isn't afraid to slow down a bit for the few subwaves that feature a swarm of common bots. In other words, it's quite good and well varied. As you get through the waves, you'll be seeing plenty of custom bots that thankfully are all fairly balanced in some way. But while the waves took a pretty big risk in breaking the status quo, it really does pay off. Every wave had unique ideas that were quite enjoyable to play through while still maintaining the familiar MvM experience. The usage of custom bots also extends to the support lineups. There isn't much, but they all play a distinct role. There are plenty of snipers that are quite lethal in this one, but my team was able to keep them down, so they weren't a particularly great deal. There are a few annoying ones, like the combat engineer on wave 2 that deploys mini sentries before dying naturally, and on wave 6 where there are these pyro supports that intentionally spawned in the backlines. They don't pick up the bombs, so I guess they're somewhat balanced, and if you have been paying attention, the mission does feature custom sentry busters. To name a few, there's a sentry buster that saps buildings, a ninja buster that jumps around your sentry and explodes mid-air, then there are busters that can disguise themselves, just to name a few that makes engineers' life a living hell. The only subwave I didn't like was on wave 2, where the mission purposefully hit an explosive gas pyro that dealt full damage and a battalion soldier from the wave bar. Not sure why the mission needed to do this. In regards to the amount of chiefs, you'll fight 2 on wave 5 as punching heavy duos. One is a Captain Punch prototype that you could apparently crouch down next to avoid damage, and the other named Captain Tickle that shot and fried his players with mittens. The 7th and final wave just features a chief soldier to kill, with the only support being a giant demoman that cabers you in one hit and dies. The soldier is named Corporal Comms, and it uses a rocket launcher dealing high damage with high vertical knockback. It shoots slow on the ground, but is able to auto jump high in the air and shoot like a rapid fire while airborne. While this mission definitely has a couple of hiccups that may not be looked at too fondly in today's day and age, I would say this is among the best of Canteen Crasher. And honestly, I would go as far as to saying that all of the exceptional qualities it has makes it stand above the other good missions of the operation. So I believe that Ultra Uplink deserves an S. The second underground advanced mission is Mineral Masher. This mission's pacing is as slow as every other mission, killing robots so fast that you'll be waiting a couple of business days before the next group spawns in. But more often than not, you're going to be entertained by the bizarre custom bot designs that are constantly reused throughout the mission. Every wave will always feature some kind of rapid fire soldier. Sometimes it gets to a point where a Colonel Barrage gets the rapid fire icon and is able to fire infinitely, aptly named Colonel Barrage Mark II. There are some giants that get paired with medics, medics, but the unique thing that it tries to do is constantly change out what medics will be used per giant. There is this weird yellow wings icon across the mini wave bars, and that's to denote what are killer B scouts that have fully upgraded scatterguns shooting in a rapid fire fashion. Some of you watching might recognize this creator's trademark. Speaking of creator, I did get a chance to invite the creator of this mission to play through the mission together. One of the things she talked about was the constant use of armored robots and giants. At a glance, they seem to only have a slight buff, though the mission is quite inconsistent. Most of the armored bots, like the giant soldiers, usually have a small 20% damage resist added to them, but there are a few exceptions like the giant heavy that also get a noticeable health boost on top of it. The armored uber medics later on will get a health boost, but don't have the damage resistance. Not to mention that the icons are also inconsistent too, where it's only the giant burst fires that get an armored shield as their identification. But from what the creator said, it seemed like the appropriate icons didn't exist back then. As far as the later half is concerned, Wave 4 didn't have much to see other than it finally bringing out tanks. Although this is the point where the mission insists on bringing out burst fire devils that can heal on hit. And Wave 5 is a culmination of everything you saw from the prior waves, with the exception that this wave allows its armored giant burst fires to also carry the battalions back up, which is quite overkill. The crit boosted variants of these giants are separate from their respective icons, and the mission makes them more special by having medics pocketing them. Again, it's a pretty bizarre design choice, but this whole final wave is even more special in the sense that it has a chance to roll between which of the two chiefs you fight at the end. One is a chief soldier named Airstrike Marshal that basically functions as a charge soldier except that it pierces resistances and for some reason has a minimal damage reduction of 10%. The second chief is far worse than the soldier, however. It's a demo named Unstoppable Destructive Force, which, as you can gather from its title, will spam its pipe grenades non-stop. The projectile spam is pretty relentless, but regardless, both finales take extremely long to get through, taking double the amount of time it needs to compared to the other waves. Other than that, I'd say this mission is far from the worst and its custom bots were more or less tolerable. It still does have the classic pacing though. Mineral Masher is C. The third and final advanced mission here is Subterranean Skirmish. The pacing is quite good in the beginning. A handful of custom bots here have relatively minimal differences to make them stand out from the usual suspects, but so far the first two beginning waves are well developed. Though compared to the other missions here, it doesn't use the upper left spawn all that much. In the later half, it does use it more often in the sense that every wave uses it for only one of their subwaves. So most of the time it feels like Big Rock where you're just shooting in one direction. The third wave is where the mission starts to spike up in difficulty, with a use of a few samurai demos along with heater heavy spawning in massive groups and with pretty high skill level. One of them burns, but it's a giant heater heavy that shoots flares, which is the most fair and balanced way to do it. The fourth wave is the only time the mission uses vaccinators, but for the most part, they're not a big deal. Though this is the only time Pyro only ever gets cucked in the beginning, by having the only giant vaccinators being fire resistant. By the fifth wave, now we're going to be seeing a lot of custom bots. We've got armored medics with the proper icons this time, as well as a couple of giant nuke demos and a few bazooka soldiers. The sixth wave is the only time where it doesn't feature support bots, but it's got giant pairs of shotgun heavies that heal on hit with a shield medic, alongside a couple of flare heal pyros and these helium gauntlets that auto jump and parachute from the sky. I have no idea what the thought process behind these guys are. Then onwards, you got direct hit soldiers and these chrono barrages that share the same icon and design as the Mark IIs from Mineral Masher, with the only difference being that the mission calls them chrono rapid fire barrages. At the end of this wave comes the chief heater heavy going by Martial Meltdown. At the good mercy of this creator, the chief does not burn players with their bullets, but there's pretty much nothing that makes this chief stand out aside from being all tanky, and this last subwave definitely needed something because it's really dull and boring having to shoot this guy for an entire minute. The final wave doesn't have much, aside from crit spamming demos, deflectors, and giant dragon furies with the conch. This wave also comes with medic support, but they're pretty few and far between, and they weren't all too impactful. This mission has some heavy reliance on custom bots for the later half, and the subwaves leading up to the finale weren't all too spectacular, but all things considered, the experience overall was quite decent. Subterranean Skirmish is C. Moving on over to Waterfront now, we have one intermediate and one advanced mission to cover. Short Circuit is the name of this map's intermediate, and within a second into the mission, it sends out expert air blast pyros that are artificially buffed to deal crit damage with reflected projectiles. Cool, I guess. The pacing on this first wave is pretty much what you'd expect out of the first half of the experience. Very few amount of robots that spawn slowly at a time, some of which will be in squads, and no more than one subwave that have common bots moving out in swarms. At the least, this mission introduces the map's unique custom bots, which are caustic robots that bleed players on hit. The bots used with it weren't all too egregious, though on one wave in particular, they're gonna mainly comprise of hit scan bots, so at times you'll just bleed out of nowhere, which is just as unfun as getting burned on hit from a heater heavy. The second half of this mission has a few decent waves, but it does bring out a couple of giants that you would not expect to see stat changes on. Not relating to that, but one of the chiefs you'll encounter is a chief grapple pyro at the start of wave 5, where its burn damage has inverse knockback and pulls you towards their location. The pacing with the second half is as slow as ever though, and despite the ever increasing lineup of bots per wave, there will be some subwaves that make you feel like nothing is really happening. The final wave has a few caustic pyro supports spawning throughout, and starts out with a final tank and a couple giant heal on kill heavies. Then it'll finish off with a chief caustic fan scout named Sporticus the Indestructible. They move slowly but deal quite an insane amount of bleed damage once a single pellet hits you. Without any sort of healing or shield medic, this boss is pretty awful to fight against due to the sheer amount of damage they inflict. Aside from the beginning of the mission having a dumb start, the general vibe of this intermediate was encroaching towards advance. The mission also had pacing issues going for it as well, and the finale does get too overwhelming towards the end. Short Circuit is D. The only advanced mission here is called Whirly Wallop. The first wave is by far the most uniquely designed wave in Canteen Crasher. It starts with everything crit boosted, but it's full of punching heavies. It would be an easy wave were it not for the soldier support that shot crit rockets but with 0 projectile speed. And this soldier runs around the map to plant these rockets like landmines. And over time, the map can turn into a minefield. It's a really impressive idea given the period of when this was made, and probably the one wave that sticks in your mind forever. At least for me. My only complaint with these rockets is that they can persist forever past the first wave, meaning that if you don't go out of your way to clear them out, they can screw you over in the long run. Disarming these bombs isn't a big deal, but I still would have liked it if the mission could do it if they were able to. Now, there's a lot more uniquely designed subwaves over the course of the mission. The 32 Ubers on wave 3 turned out to be just their whole entire subwave, where some of them can use syringe guns. This weird lightning bolt icon on wave 4 is used to represent giant plasma soldiers that fire rescue ranger bolts. The same wave will also use caustic bots one time in the mission, where at the end they are all heavies, but are named cultistic heavies? Huh? But just as there are many subwaves that are cool and interesting, there are also an equal amount of other subwaves that aren't the best. Much of the waves here are far more simpler compared to the 60 or so missions we've covered up to this point, and the subwaves that feature a large amount of specific robots tend to become dull by the time they're done with. There are supports throughout the waves, but pretty much all of them are delegated to sniper or spy roles, so you won't be seeing them shake things up much. And as much as I liked the various unique subwaves it had, there were a couple towards the last third of the mission that weren't too impressive. There are obvious references to some of the Valve missions, like the Big Rock Burst Fires and the 60k health tank from Broken Parts. This subwave is pretty bad because all that you do here for the first minute is shooting down this tank, and you have to destroy this thing just so you can let the 2 burst fires be sent out. Then there's this super elongated wait time for the one and only super bonk scout to spawn at the very end. This supposed gag would never land on you if you never played Empire Escalation. Separate from that, Wave 6 had giant barrage demos and soldiers, along with the 80 samurai demos. The thing about this wave is that the samurai demos had their attributes split in half, where the first subwave had their shields but no auto jump, and vice versa for the other one. While this is a cool wave idea, as I mentioned before, the whole shtick does run out of steam that you kinda just want the wave to be over and done with. Moving past that, the 7th wave is just a boss wave with uber medic support. The chief scout you fight is the horrid Wilter that uses a scatter gun. They're quite slow, but they're the only chief in Canteen Crasher that can deal fall damage on hit, which is in line with the innovative and experimental design goals of this mission. But they definitely should have chosen a different chief for this because it's incredibly nauseating to play through this, especially as the main target. This mission definitely has a lot of great ideas brought forth, but simultaneously it does come with a few bad areas, and its second half wasn't able to keep up the momentum. But despite all that, I'd still say this is one of the better Canteen Crasher missions out there. Whirly Wallop is B. We have 2 more maps left over for Canteen Crasher, and the second to last one on the list is Waterlogged. This debuted here as a map submission, and it features one intermediate, which will actually be the final one to cover in Canteen Crasher, and also one advanced mission. The intermediate is called Flu Fight. The mission starts off with some of the strongest commons you don't see often in an intermediate: burst fires, samurai demos, and there's also push on hit deflector heavies when you get to the second wave. The one custom bot that isn't used too much here, but is still worth mentioning, are the common armored Sandmans. These guys not not only have their health increased to 650, but have quite a bit of damage resistance to go along with them, but oddly seems to also take 2 times the melee damage too. The mission will utilize 3 of the spawn points in the front, 2 that are next to one another, and the other that's really quite far away. This other spawn point is not used very much, however whenever the mission does, it's definitely a use it when I feel like it kind of deal. Sometimes, albeit rarely, the mission will try and pull a fast one and spawn gate bots in the far upper spawn point, like this giant salmon scout that just captured the gate behind us on the second wave. The final wave didn't have much going on, though it would start with heavies first appearing from the far upper spawn point. There's only 2 robots here that push on hit. The first is a giant deflector heavy, and the second is a chief blast demo that uses the loose cannon. It fired in a huge burst upon dropping down, however it doesn't reload to full, so if you just keep them locked onto a player or sentry, they'll be pretty easy to destroy. Then you'll fight the last few Chrono Barrages that came with a few Uber Medics and Conch soldiers before finishing off. Honestly, in terms of pacing, this is one of the better intermediates, but I can't say I'm a huge fan of the use of the third spawn point upstairs. Blue fight is C. The advanced mission is called Cold Shoulder. Not sure what's happening, but transitioning over to this one has the icon for the reused Armored Sandman as a missing texture that turns back to normal when you bring up the scoreboard. I don't know what this is. This mission does take itself seriously, and among the waves you'll be seeing at least 1 set of crit boosted bots every wave. For the most part is balanced by being given to the projectile based robots, though it will give them to some pyros and scouts later down the line. Although this mission will decide to crit boost the support sniper on wave 3 that for some reason was also given a medic pocket as well. My team did make sure to keep them from doing anything though, so I can't really comment much more on them. Like the intermediate from before, you'll spend most of the time camping the 2 left spawn points until the mission decides to spawn gate bots sneaking behind from the upper right spawn point. Though the one wave that decides to use both sides at once is wave 4. Though the swarm of heavies will chew you up and possibly get a gate capture here. We're past the spawn point issue, but I like to point out the end of wave 4, where you'll fight 2 major crits with a Z. They seem to have a much faster fire rate than usual, and one other fact of trivia that I didn't see at the time is that apparently they have level 4 rocket specialist. Wave 5 doesn't have much compared to the other waves. There were a couple of giant heal on kill deflectors, though they were easily killed with the lack of commons around. Only subwave here that was really annoying were the groups of jumping sandmans appearing from the upper right spawn. The final wave starts with swarms of conch soldiers, but you will fight 2 chief heavies back to back. One is a deflector heavy named Colonel Concussion that can push players on hit with a pretty high fire rate. The second chief heavy appears after killing Colonel Concussion, named Tickle Tuckleto, a holiday punch Santa heavy that basically one-shots players and turns them into gold. Towards the end of the mission, you will be destroying more giant deflector push heavies, along with more crit boosted bots and giant jumping sandmans that trickle in from time to time. By this point, it does start to become repetitive and stale, despite the more tougher deflector variants that come later. It's not the best way to close this mission off, but overall, it's still one of the relatively decent ones. It was being challenging without solely relying on custom bots with a lot of stat changes, which is fine by me. Cold Shoulder is B. To close us off, here's a map that was not created for Canteen Crasher, but only has 2 missions ever made for it, Yucatan. It has one of the most unique art passes across the MvM maps, and with a well-designed skybox too, but as you can tell just by walking from spawn that it's got plenty of problems. The layout is extremely open with barely any side covers, which makes every class except snipers suffer pretty badly here. Not to mention that the layout is symmetrical too. There are a couple of blemishes here and there which aren't too concerning, but perhaps the most offensive one is out in the front with this massive pile of rocks and a tree. I don't understand why, but there is this ginormous invisible clip brush that extends far out from the prop it's meant for. Also, this map has a death pit that just plays some weird meme sounds when you fall into them.
Olivio's.
Other than that, as we'll get into the last 2 advanced missions here, we're gonna learn more about why playing on this map isn't as good as it looks. The second to last advanced mission is Ruins Rumble, with 3 waves to beat. The first wave isn't remarkable by any means, but it does establish the issues of why this map is pretty bad to play. The mission makes frequent use of alternating between the 3 spawn points out in front, meaning that it's a constant gameplay loop of shooting bots on one side and then walking towards the other side so that you can shoot more robots. Yeah, I guess you could run double engineer, but that would also mean both sides barely have any robots to shoot at. As you can imagine with the egregious sidelines and lack of cover, snipers and engineer bots can dominate the map if you don't have anyone that can keep them in check, as well as hit scan robots that will, on occasion, spawn in massive groups. Wave 2 is where things will start to get interesting, but in a pretty bad way. The first subwave has 2 tanks spawning both sides, but there is also just 2 conch soldiers spawning at a time here, where the pacing is just absolute dog water. It does pick itself back up afterwards, as it will spawn giant heavies along with a couple of air blast pyros and Gru heavies. There's a couple of giant demos with Uber medics, aptly named one pipe demos, that contrary to the name, do not fire 1 pipe per reload. Instead, their pipes just do double damage. Something worth mentioning is that the second wave will start spawning 2 bombs onwards, which further makes holding the defenses far more annoying, as you now have to sometimes deal with the second bomb runner on the other side. Trust me, it's pretty easy to have a bot sneak around the other side with the bomb. Anyways, not much really happens until you get to the giant burst fires at the end that fire infinitely? Just why? It just removes all the nuance of fighting a burst fire and just instead turns into a Pyro Killer 9000. The third and final wave starts with the chief demo with the most unique icon I've seen. They are the Corporal Steel Bomber, which shoots its iron bomber in a long burst. Honestly, it wasn't too threatening since it didn't deal too much damage and was easily dodgeable. Onwards, it will start to send out rocket spamming heater heavies that burn players on hit and a couple of pyros. Real quick, I just want to mention that this is the final appearance of a heater heavy that burns on hit in Canteen Crasher. Everyone, let's give a round of applause for our special guest. Then there's 2 giant push on hit heavies with 2 buffed Uber medics each. These medics were able to give overheal and have a duration bonus that more than anything else just stalled for time. After that though, the wave just starts to stagnate and loses its momentum. Apart from the common 1 pipe demos that dealt 2 times the damage, there's giant buff banners and a few crit boosted giants, but they were all pretty boring to fight. Then it just ends with the final tank and giant rapid fires pocketed by Ubers. Yeah, the last few minutes of the wave really does feel like the creator just ran out of ideas. This mission really didn't feel great to play, especially owing to the map's flaws. There were also just some custom bots that were quite frustrating to deal with, and designed for the worst. Ruins Rumble gets an F. The last advanced mission of Canteen Crasher is Fallout Frenzy. This mission takes itself seriously, and the first instance of it is right at the starting subwave where a crits medic is pocketing a giant bowman with a razorback. Nice. This first wave is far from the worst that this mission has to offer. However, a very prominent issue that makes it return is our dear old friend, the slow pacing. But by far, the most annoying thing across all waves are the infinite supports spawning near the end of every one of them. Some of the more egregious waves will have you always needing someone to be shooting at the infinite supports, while others seek out the main robots in order to progress. And the map once again makes this frustrating to deal with. Now, the second wave is relatively generic, aside from conch soldiers squatted with the heavy that now has a brass beast, but towards the end you'll have a tank that, relative to the payout up to this point, is pretty thick with its 30k health. If you don't have a lot of tank DPS here, eventually it will start going through the map's tank tunnel, which is extremely long and stalls away far longer than necessary.
So how was your day?
The third wave brings out 2 bombs for the rest of the mission, while also starting to bring out some of the worst custom bots to deal with. There's groups of loose cannon demos first, then there is just an entire subwave of bison soldiers and extremely long range pyros, both of which will have inverse knockback. After the giant pyros with shield medics, there is just an entire subwave of charging heavies, paired with supporting soldiers to close the wave off. The stats that these custom steel gauntlets have is that apparently they deal double damage at half health and speed boost on hit, but in practice it's pretty much unnoticeable. And to be honest, the subwave is just pretty bad overall. The fourth wave sends giant fan scouts to bring out 2 bombs for the second time, along with tanks from both sides that send out the next one after one of them dies. There is a bunch of explosive spam coming from the infinitely spawning demos and battalion soldiers shortly after. This wave also brings out the nerfed exploding gas pyros too. At the end are giant burst fire direct hit soldiers with a massive clip size, along with their projectile speed boosted by a significant amount. Besides that, all the bots in the wave as well as the slow pacing here makes this the longest wave to clear by a significant margin. The fifth wave uses giant fan scouts for the 3rd time. There's giant soldiers here that are called Lieutenant Smoke Bombs that shoot extremely fast rockets with the aforementioned explosion effect. There's a section that's just a hit scan hell with a bunch of heavies and soldiers that are all mini crit boosted. There's crit boosted giants paired with medics that appear throughout the wave, but nothing to write home about. It does stagnate though due to the pacing of the mission, but fortunately it does pick itself back up with the 6th and final wave that features a never-before-seen mechanic for its time, which is basically a 6-minute timer for the wave. And unfortunately, the pacing is still pretty bad, along with the frustrating spam of shield medics in the beginning. There's a giant deflector that's paired with 3 giant vaccinators, but having a spy on the team will make them fall flat on their faces. There is a small period where nothing is really going on, before facing the final chief of the operation, named Nuclear Launch Commander, a crit boosted heal on kill deflector heavy. That's really all there is to the chief. This is honestly a pretty underwhelming mission. The whole experience itself was pretty slow and is quite repetitive with the constant use of support bots non-stop. There are also some custom bots that are of questionable quality, and not to mention the fact that this mission takes way too long to complete at 28 minutes. The nuke timer was a neat idea, I'll give it that, but the finale really had nothing going on that made it exciting to play through. Fallout Frenzy is F. And that wraps up Operation Canteen Crasher, a massively time-consuming experience that, while it has some good missions that withstood the test of time, also has a vast majority of missions that are of questionable quality and suffers from a long and strict time quota that mainly serves to pad out the experience longer than necessary. I completed Canteen Crasher on the archives at around 35 hours, and that was quite a lot of time to get through its 68 missions. I bet around 15% of that could have been trimmed down if the spawn times of the robots were adjusted to be on par with today's standards. The custom robots, for how egregious and frustrating many of them can be, as well as some specific missions in particular, can be somewhat argued for the fact that Potato really just didn't know any better at the time. Many of the missions throughout did suffer from being boring to sit through, which in all fairness was a part of Potato's second entry into Community MvM, and can also be attributed to the player's skill levels being much lower back then compared to now, and they deemed it necessary to introduce the intermediates for the very first time. But regardless of the choices made within these missions, it's easy to forget how important Canteen Crasher was for its time. While Titanium Tank allowed Potato to get a foot in the door for community events, Canteen Crasher ultimately set the groundwork for how Community MvM would continue to operate to this day. The departure of a competitive contest in favor of a first-come first-served jam, the overhaul of the scoring system into a pass-fail system, and allowing for more than one judge to expedite the submissions process, and the multiple earnable medals for just spending some time playing through the featured content. Much of the DNA within the newer operations have originated more from here than in Titanium Tank. If you were to ask me where Potato really started, well, I'd say this is it. And I am glad to say that the reason why I chose to play Community MvM over the other TF2 game modes to this day was because of Canteen Crasher. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my long-form retrospective on Canteen Crasher, and if you did, you should like the video and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll be calling down a squad of heater heavies that will set your house ablaze with bullets. Tune in next time for when I cover the third entry into Community MvM, where it would set even more groundwork for supporting charities in the future, introduce expert missions for the very first time, and featuring 45 community-made maps with a grand total of oh no.